Chapter 157. Unlike the decadent scene he saw in the stone house during the day, the current Riculab seemed to have changed into a shiny shell. His hair had been rearranged, and although it wasn't neat, it felt a little wild amidst the messiness. A few protruding ends of his hair gave off a mysterious feeling under the illumination of the lights. The endless confidence hidden within Riculab was revealed. The atmosphere of the Night of Dance was pushed to a new peak because of the arrival of Riculab, the alpha wolf. Stepping to the beat of the music, he waved his arms with wildness and laziness. He felt like a wolf king strolling on the grassland, dangerous and vivid, ignoring the scorching eyes of many dancers around him. When he stepped on a round platform that slowly rose in the center of the dance floor, Lycrabe's domineering aura instantly dispersed the impetuosity, and he looked particularly dazzling on this stage that belonged to him alone. Under the round platform, people on the dance floor screamed, shouted, and shouted crazily. The next moment, all of this was buried by the exploding music again. Throwing off his coat, his shirt looked messy with the dance. The top 3 buttons of his shirt were missing, and the open lapel showed his masculine charm. Only his dancing posture could be seen clearly. His eyes were always mysterious, and his body was twisting. Under the dazzling light, he seemed to be dancing casually but stylishly. Under his feet, under the round platform, were his fans who were almost crazy because of the music and alcohol. The women screamed and shouted under the circular platform. Their hot bodies were attached to the flaming red lips, and they blew a charming kiss. Their twisted waists, seductive arcs, and sexy bodies swayed as flexibly as a demon. They all had intoxicated smiles on their faces. Their hair flew with the swaying of their bodies and passed by other male dancers around them, but they didn't care whether the people next to them would be aroused by the hair that scratched their skin and stimulated their nerves, because their eyes were always on the person on the high platform who didn't look anyone in the eye. The women only felt that the vague impulse suddenly attacked their insides. This kind of obsessive following was more like the product of the atmosphere under the full release of hormones, which instantly covered the rationality hidden under the body and let the sensibility go boldly. His hormones were about to explode. In a small private room a little further away, Yudo's unconsciously swayed to the music. Tang Kakikyu originally wanted to wear the big earphones to block everything outside, but when her eyes swept over the high platform that had not been there before, her eyes widened. That is. Uncle Drunkard. Celine gave her a yet-to-be-thinkable look. Why does it feel like you've changed your skin in just a few hours? However, he did become more handsome after taking care of himself. This shows how important personal hygiene is. Tang Kakikyu commented with a serious expression. However, as she watched, Tang Kakikyu also had a tendency to fall into this bewitching realm. She was still holding the big earphones that Celine found for her, but she had no intention of putting them on. This place was a pool of dye, and every newcomer would be dizzy with it. Celine turned his head to look at Huimao, who was squatting by the transparent window and twisting his body to the rhythm. He was a little surprised. This cat can dance. As if to prove Celine's thoughts, Huimao was very dissatisfied with the atmosphere in this small private room. He turned to Celine and said, "I'm going out for a while." After that, he rushed out of the room and disappeared. "Where is he going?" Tang Kakikyu asked. Looking at the dancing floor below, Tang Qiuqiu was sure that she did not like this place, but the atmosphere was very stimulating. Just as Celine and Tang Qiuqiu were guessing where Huimao was going to steal food, Celine suddenly sensed something and looked at the high platform. A gray figure slid down the reflective pole under the high platform and slipped on the circular high platform. "Celine, Master Cat, please take it easy." Riculab had always felt that he was born to live in this place. He didn't need too much alcohol or drugs. All he needed was to walk into this deafening arena and step onto this platform that belonged to him alone, and that would be enough for him. He seemed to be numb, drunk, and muddle-headed. He only moved according to his thoughts and sweated wantonly, as if he wanted to make his cooled blood boil in this way. This was his paradise. He didn't need to say a single word. At this moment, no one would care about his background or his past. He needed to vent and go crazy. He didn't care about the passionate kisses of the strangers below him. He didn't care about the fiery gazes of his followers. He only wanted to be happy. It was simple. He just needed to be happy. As long as he was happy, Lycrabe did not seem to be tired. He was like a beast that suddenly woke up and struggled out of its cage. He crazily inhaled fresh air and greedily enjoyed his freedom. He was not willing to look back. Suddenly, Riculab sensed that something was amiss. Like a king whose territory had been invaded, his eyes immediately turned sharp and fierce. However, when he saw that the person he was sharing the stage with and twisting his body to the rhythm was actually a gray cat that looked pretty ordinary on the outside, he slowly withdrew his sharp gaze and shot the gray cat an interested glance. When the gray cat saw Riculab's gaze that looked like it was looking at a juggling animal, it immediately bristled. Unlike the way he used to settle things with force whenever he got angry, Huimao looked at Lycrabe without showing any weakness. His eyes were very provocative and even a little disdainful and contemptuous. "Oh, this cat is interesting. Violent dance? Well, since you want it, I'll play with you." Lycrabe raised his hand and snapped his fingers. With this action, the music in the venue changed. The style of the music was extremely dazzling, with a distinct sense of rhythm. The sweeping lights changed, and the largest projector in the venue showed the scene on the circular high platform. A man and a cat, both fighting with their dance without showing any weakness. Although it was just a cat, the people who saw Huimao felt that this cat was more enchanting than a human. Every gaze, trembling ears, the bending of the body that humans could not compare with, the teasing tail, and the rhythmic steps gave people a different kind of rhythm. It seemed indifferent, but with a lazy and arrogant gaze that seemed to despise everything. With the beat of the music and the dance, it beat the hearts of the audience under the circular high platform bit by bit. Silan rubbed his forehead and rubbed the space between his eyebrows. While Tang Qiuqiu was cheering him on, he looked at the cat on the high platform that had forgotten everything and was twisting its fat butt. He sighed in his heart, "Master Cat, you are really omnipotent. You are indeed an enchanting product of a half-mechanical, half-living body." The music was full of rhythmic sense, the agile movements with skills, the contraction and relaxation of the dancing body in the rhythm, and the dance steps that could not be replicated and the free swaying of the heart. This special combination attracted all the attention of the entire dance night. The atmosphere of the scene soared with their dance. Now no one was dancing on the dance floor. Everyone was looking at the high platform and the projection. The applause and roars that broke out seemed to be able to overturn the roof of the auditorium. Whistles, screams, and the fiery atmosphere impacted every new pole, and also pushed the atmosphere of the entire dance night to a climax again and again. It heated up, and heated up again. Now, Riculab was no longer dancing alone and immersed in his own ego. In this circular area, he felt a power that rivaled his own, a unique charm that didn't lose out to any other dancer. Before this, who could imagine that a cat could show the charm of dance? The person, like a king, led everyone. Occasionally, he looked at the audience, faint, lazy, and slow, but with a fatal charm, making people unable to move their eyes away from him, almost immediately worshipping him. The flowing rhythm of the cat, with a trace of affection, intimacy, and alienation, like a paradox, impacted people's rationality, the intensity of an irresistible force. Silan suddenly frowned. The wonderful performance of the person and the cat on the circular high platform and the music had gradually formed a hypnotic effect. He turned his head and looked at Tang Qiuqiu, whose breathing rhythm had begun to show abnormalities. He took the headphones from Tang Qiuqiu's hand and put them on her. After putting on the headphones, Tang Qiuqiu slowly came back to her senses, with confusion and puzzlement. Her memory seemed to be a little chaotic, just like those people who had a hangover described in the books. "Brother Silan, what happened?" Tang Qiuqiu asked. When speaking of this, Tang Qiuqiu still felt a little out of breath. She was still thinking, Could it be a problem with the food here? Silen shook his head and pointed to the person and the cat on the circular high platform. You've seen too much, and you've lost your mind. Just listen to some soothing music to relieve it. It was the first time that Tang Qiuqiu had been to this kind of place, and her resistance was certainly not as good as those old foxes. Oh. Although she didn't quite understand why such a situation would happen when watching a performance, she glanced at Yudo's, whose breathing was gradually becoming unstable next to her, and decisively adjusted the music in the player. But in her heart, Tang Qiuqiu thought, this place is really terrible. Although she didn't hate it as much as when she first came in, she still had a lingering fear. Sure enough, as Yudo's said, was this a place for adults? The people outside the high platform didn't know that the inside had been distorted and strange, and they were still cheering enthusiastically. On the dance floor, people's eyes were glued to each other. With the movements of the person and the cat, their heartbeats were almost synchronized. The rhythm was syncopated, and every change in the beat was grasped by the two dancers on the circular high platform. When the strong beat in the rhythm fell on the unexpected syncopated rhythm, the movements of the person and the cat became very exciting. It was obviously a seemingly random movement, but there was a kind of complexity in it. It was a combination of hardness and softness, but it was unpredictable. It was impossible to guess the next movement, and it was impossible to keep up with their rhythm and unconsciously follow closely. The people who focused on the movements of the two on the high platform felt that they were gradually out of breath. At first, they thought it was an illusion. After all, they had been in the dance night for so many years, what kind of craziness had they not experienced? But such a situation had never happened before. But as time passed, someone couldn't breathe, fell down, and fainted. Then the second, the third, and the fourth, the flow of blood seemed to be speeding up, but when it reached the first turn, it was suddenly cut off. The circulating body fluid was messed up and out of control. They couldn't control their emotions according to their own thoughts, so they were slowly dragged into the darkness by the pair of invisible psychedelic hands. In the past, there were dancers who fainted because their heart and lung function couldn't keep up with the overly excited rhythm or because they were too excited. Dance night specially had a group of guards to pay attention to the situation on the scene. If there was a fight, they would come out according to the circumstances, and once they found the fainted person, they would immediately take action. Fainting was not something that could be treated casually. No one knew what caused the fainting. But after all, compared with the weaker physical fitness of the audience on the dance floor, the guards were much better. At least when the audience on the dance floor fainted one after another, none of the guards had such a situation. At most, they felt that their breath was a little unstable, but the atmosphere would cause such a situation, and no one would think too deeply about it. Of course, because of the fainted people on the dance floor, the guards who were originally paying attention to the two performances on the stage were forced to shift their attention, which allowed them to escape the same fate as the audience on the dance floor. The two on the stage were still oblivious to everything else, as if they wouldn't stop until the end. Below the stage, the audience that fainted were sent out one after another. When the managers noticed, they suddenly found that unknowingly, 1/3 of the people in the middle had been reduced, and the remaining people, looking at their abnormal breathing rhythm, knew that they couldn't hold on for much longer. But they couldn't suddenly stop the dance of the two. It must be known that such a situation was rare in 1,000 years, perhaps no one had seen it in 10,000 years. At least no one had reported it in official publications. Business opportunity. Wonderful theme. Behind this nightclub, there were businessmen from another planet, as well as well-known managers of electronic publications. Therefore, there was almost no discussion. Both sides unanimously ordered everything on the dance floor to continue, and the fainted people were sent to the emergency room. All the cameras were aimed at the man and the cat on the circular platform. They didn't care about the people below who fell because of them one after another, or rather, they didn't care about the people below at all. They didn't even know whether the people below had fallen or not, and they continued to dance to their heart's content. Time unknowingly came to midnight, and then they continued to move forward. Less than half of the people on the dance floor were left. Another hour passed. Only a quarter of the people on the dance floor were left. When the sky began to blur, on the dance floor of Dancing Night, only 1/10 of the original people were left. This 1/10 of the people were indeed people with strong physical fitness, otherwise, they wouldn't have been able to last until now. Lycrabe had never felt so happy dancing. The regret of standing here in the past turned out to be a sigh of not being able to find an opponent. However, Lycrabe seemed to have gradually forgotten that his opponent was a cat. Although it was a different cat, it was still a cat. The music had gradually lost its meaning. There was no need for words. The man and the cat decided to end this contest as if their hearts were supernatural. Therefore, when Lycrabe was preparing for a perfect curtain call, something happened that made Lycrabe want to spit out blood. There really is a fucking cat out of a person. A cat's meow that gathered all kinds of emotions and extreme disturbances of people's nerves, meow, instantly killed the remaining 1/10 of the people on the dance floor. Scylla looked at the people who had fainted on the dance floor and really felt sorry for them. Look, they didn't faint earlier, and now they were instantly killed by this cat's meow. It was much more serious than the people who had fainted before. Maybe when they woke up, they wouldn't remember what happened that night. Maybe there would be sequelae. One day, when they heard the cat's meow, they would reflexively twitch. Of course, it would be fine after a few years, but how many years? Yudos had long since been knocked unconscious by Scylla's palm strike. This would at least protect his brain from some of the poison. Before leaving, Scylla looked at the man and the cat who were playing a curtain call on the circular platform. He curled his lips, two scourges. Many people were destined to be at a loss that night. When Scylla dragged Yudos and Tang Chiochio back to the residence, the lights on the first floor were still on, and the lights in the front yard were also on. Mrs. Wentz was not asleep. She was sitting in the room, sewing a puppet while waiting for them. Although he had told Mrs. Wentz that he would play outside tonight, he didn't expect that Mrs. Wentz would sit here and wait. Yudos was very lucky. He had a great mother. This was something that many people would never get. Seeing Scylla and Tang Chiochio coming back, Mrs. Wentz put down her work and smiled gently. "You're back." She stood up and was ready to take Yudos. Scylla shook his head with a smile and pointed to Yudos. He was too excited today and drank some wine. "He's quite heavy. Let me take care of him." Mrs. Wentz led Scylla to Yudos' room and took out some soothing soup for Scylla and Tang Chiochio to drink. She also prepared some hot water for Scylla and Tang Chiochio to wash up and rest. She would take care of Yudos. Seeing that Mrs. Wentz had made up her mind, Scylla didn't refuse. After thanking her, he went upstairs with Tang Chiochio. Not long after he went upstairs, he saw the gray cat returning from outside with a smug look on its face. It raised its head and looked like it had just won a battle. Coupled with Tang Chiochio's compliments, Huimao's tail was almost up to the sky. Someone tried to follow me in Dancing Night, but I got rid of him. Huimao stroked his whiskers and looked at Zhang Zian. "You ate him?" asked Scylla. Although it was a cat, it could still eat people. Huimao shook his whiskers disdainfully. "Of course not. I just knocked him out." Scylla was silent. Being knocked out by this cat was even more miserable than being killed by the cat's meow. He wondered if those people would still remember this cat when they woke up. After thinking for a while, Scylla asked again, "What about the recording of the Dancing Night?" "Of course I destroyed it." Now there were some things that didn't need Scylla to say. Huimao could do it on his own. Not bad. Scylla rarely praised Huimao. That's... Thinking of something, Huimao suddenly looked serious, but his eyes were bright. "Scylla, I have an idea." Back home, Lycrabe was still in a trance. Before, he wandered in the city of desire, dancing contentedly but lonely. Now, the excitement had cooled down. It was like the desolation after prosperity. Lycrabe threw himself on the bed, feeling stuffy. After such a long time of dancing, his body was very tired, but the nerves in his brain kept stimulating him and he couldn't fall asleep. With his eyes open, he was like a seriously ill insomniac. He suddenly felt a little desperate. Lycrabe felt that he was like a fruit that was left on the ground. No one paid attention to him, and then he fell into the darkness and slowly rotted until the core was gone. When would the core re-enter the new land and take root? What Lycrabe didn't expect was that the new students would come so soon. Chapter 158. Just as Scylla expected, the people who fainted on the night of Dance Night all had chaotic memories or memory gaps. The memory of the man and the cat dancing on the circular platform on the dance floor was too vague, or they could not remember it at all. Maybe they would remember some vague shadows when they woke up soon, but it was just a vague shadow. Whenever they were dancing, some hazy things would flash through their minds until they forgot about them. Of course, there were also people who remembered what had happened. Although their memories weren't complete, they knew that Rickulab wasn't the only one dancing on the circular stage that day. A gray cat was present as well. Some people might think that the gray cat was a monster or some kind of special species, but that had nothing to do with Scylla or Wheeze. After that night, the senior management of Dance Night checked all the video recording equipment. All the records were messed up and could not be restored. If they were forced to restore it, all the records would disappear automatically. They guessed that there might be high-tech people who did not belong to Dance Night hacking into the system and tampering with all the recording programs. They also reported this matter, but the reply they got from the planetary government was that this matter was over. The senior management of Dance Night smelled that there must be someone involved that they could not afford to offend. Compared with the crazy dancing that night, they were more worried about their status and career. So since they received the secret message from the top, the senior management of Dance Night collectively lost their memories. There were also some media that continued to investigate, but in the process of the investigation, they were forcibly obstructed by the non-government and the strong intervention of the government. In the end, they had no choice but to give up. Because if they continued to investigate, even if they knew the truth of that night, they might not be alive to report it. There were countless wronged souls on this planet, and the wailing souls in the sandstorm were a constant reminder of some hidden eyes on this planet. Rickulab only went to the night of the dance once in a while, so after going there last night, he went back to his usual decadent style, lying on his bed and sleeping, not even eating breakfast or lunch. However, when Lycrabe got up to drink water, his hand holding the cup suddenly stopped. He opened the door and saw Scylla sitting on the sofa in the living room, reading a paper version of a medical book. Hui Mao was walking around, sniffing some medicine cans from time to time. Seeing Lycrabe, Hui Mao raised its head and proudly greeted him with its tail wagging. "Yo, you're up, loser." The corner of Lycrabe's eyes twitched. He thought of the last moment of the curtain call and the ecstatic meow of the cat that made him realize that he had lost to this seductive cat. He pulled up a chair and sat down, finished the water in the cup, put down the cup, and then looked expressionlessly at Scylla and Hui Mao, who was proudly circling next to him. "I remember that all the doors were locked. How did you get in?" Lycrabe asked. In fact, it was not just the doors. Every time after Lycrabe went to Dance Night and returned to his residence, he would close all the doors and windows tightly, and the defense system would be fully activated. Even if a bug got in, it would be immediately eliminated. Even if it couldn't be eliminated, it would still sound the alarm. Lycrabe thought that even if he slept, he would not be able to hear the alarm, which meant that everything was normal. So, under normal circumstances, how did this person and cat get in? Hui Mao squatted on the high cabinet and looked down. Now it liked the feeling of looking down from a high place more and more. It glanced at Lycrabe with disdain and said quite proudly, "Humph, you want to stop us with this kind of weak defense?" Scylla didn't say anything. Since it was Hui Mao's suggestion, it would let the cat try. Maybe the effect would be better. Hearing Hui Mao's words, Lycrabe raised his eyebrows. The defense system of his house was not weaker than the planetary government's, but in this cat's eyes, it was weak defense. Who are you? What is your purpose? Lycrabe asked in a deep voice. The last time Eudos brought these two guys here, Riculab noticed that the man sitting on the sofa was very good at hiding his strength. Riculab even suspected that Riculab was able to detect the presence of the neurotoxin because the man in front of him went easy on him. Hey, loser, do you want to change your living environment? Like hanging out with us? Don't worry, I will protect you. I am very strong, Huimao said in a tone that said, I am the big brother and you are the little brother. Lycrabe twitched the corner of his mouth and looked at Scylla, who had no reaction. However, he saw that Scylla didn't even raise his head. His eyes were on the open book in his hands. Not interested, Lycrabe said. Huh? You refuse? Huimao's whiskers stood up and he squinted at Lycrabe. Anyone could feel that the cat was in a very bad mood. After all, Scylla had guaranteed that it could persuade Lycrabe. Who knew that this guy would refuse so directly? Yes, this is good. I am very satisfied with the current situation. Lycrabe poured a cup of tea to refresh himself. As for the guy in front of him, he didn't need to say anything. He had already finished a few cups. He even used the top-quality tea leaves that he treasured in the cabinet. It must have been found by that bastard cat. This is good. Huimao looked up and down at Lycrabe. He glanced at Lycrabe as if he was looking at Eudos' broken car. You look like a poor worm now. Poor worm, he hadn't heard that word for a long time. Lycrabe's eyes suddenly became sharp. The instantaneous murderous aura made the temperature in the room drop a few degrees. However, Scylla and Huimao didn't react. What, you want to kill the cat after being exposed? I can kill a cat like you with one paw. Before Huimao could finish, a knife was inserted deep into the cabinet next to Huimao's paw. Scylla raised his head to look at her before returning his attention back to the book. The hairs on Weeza's eyebrows twitched a little before it let out a snort. Then, it lifted its seemingly meaty feet, spread its claws and cut the scalpel into strips like it was tofu. Moreover, there was no shrill sound when it cut the scalpel. If Riculab wasn't familiar with the material of his scalpel, he would have thought that it was made of wood. After cutting the knife into strips, Huimao didn't stop. As if he wanted to show off his power, he bent his paw and picked up the knife that was cut into strips. He opened his mouth and bit on it. He ate it bit by bit like biting biscuits. After eating all of it, he muttered, not delicious. Bah! A metal ball was spat out. It looked like it was melted by high temperature. Lycrabe's pupils shrank. He suddenly felt a sense of powerlessness. No wonder he was defeated by this cat. This cat was not something that humans could fight against. Scylla let out a sigh. He knew that he was no match for this cat in terms of martial strength, and he wasn't confident that he could beat them even if he used medicine. The living room was covered in medicine to begin with, and many of them were colorless and odorless. The longer someone stayed in the room, the more they would show their effects. It was obvious that they had been in the room for a while now, but they didn't feel any discomfort at all. This was also the first time that Lycrabe felt so powerless in so many years. The day before, he was defeated by this cat. Now, he couldn't even fight back. The potions that he had always been confident in didn't have any effect. What Lycrabe didn't know was that it wasn't that his potions didn't work. It was that the physiques of Scylla and Huimao were too special. There was no reaction at all. Seeing that Lycrabe was silent, Huimao was angry. It seemed that he had to change his method. He pretended to clear his throat and said, Lycrabe Van. I came to planet Acerella 18 years ago. Although I don't know what relationship you have with the people of the planet's government, I believe that you have a good relationship. If you are worried that they will make trouble for you and won't let you leave, I can help you solve it. Lycrabe wasn't surprised that Huimao knew about this. He just needed to look into it. Many people in the upper echelons of Acerella knew that he was involved with the people of the Acerella planet's government. Many things were settled by the government. Otherwise, it would have been impossible for the 10-year-old Lycrabe to gain a foothold on this harsh planet so easily. Shaking his ears, Huimao began to become impatient. Shaking its ears, the gray cat began to grow impatient. All I know is that you're a pretty good dancer, and you're the only one I've found pleasing to my eyes ever since I left this place. Silen said that your herbology is pretty good, and that your talents are buried in this place. But I don't care about that. You humans just love to overthink things, drag things out, overcomplicate things, and self-harm. Never mind, this cat doesn't know how to convince people. I'll give you 2 days to think about it. After saying that, Huimao jumped down from the cabinet, glanced at Lycrabe, and walked out without looking back. Silen put down the book and stood up. Opportunities are meant to be grasped. The universe is vast. After putting a small bottle on the table, Silen also left. Just like when they came, they didn't alert the defense system at all. Lycrabe looked at the small bottle on the table with an unreadable expression. This bottle contained the neurotoxin that he had sensed on Silen last time. Based on the information he knew, it was highly likely that the raw materials needed to make such a neurotoxin would cross several star zones and not be concentrated in one place. Although Lycrabe had stayed on this planet since he was 10 years old, he had read books and electronic publications. He definitely knew a lot of information. But no matter how much he knew, it was a fact that he didn't have the raw materials. Many times, he had inspiration but couldn't implement it. Walking to the bedroom, Lycrabe took out a book under his pillow. It was a record of all his inspirations that couldn't be implemented. After leaving Lycrabe's residence, Huimao was very angry. Persuading people really wasn't suitable for it. If his answer is no in 2 days, are you going to give up? Silen asked. How is that possible? I'll come back stronger. I'll let him know the consequences of offending a cat. Huimao revealed his fangs and smiled sinisterly. Returning to Yudo's small house, Tang Qiuqiu helped Mrs. Wentz prepare dinner. Compared to the previous dinner, today's was much more abundant. But there was a new member, a 2-year-old boy, Yudo's cousin, Taler. Taler was the child of Yudo's aunt, but his aunt passed away not long after giving birth to Taler. His uncle married a second wife a year ago, so he directly ignored Taler and sent him to an infant care center. He only paid a small amount of money every month. Now, because of business problems, his uncle was already in debt. He wanted to pack up and run away when no one was paying attention, but his flying car was blown off and he died. When Taro's upkeep was not met, the people at the foster center contacted Mrs. Wentz, because no one related to Taro was willing to take on the burden. How much money did it take to raise a child? They could not even afford to raise their own child, let alone someone else's. In the end, it was Mrs. Wentz who took over custody of Taler. Yudos didn't know how to tell Mrs. Wentz that he had won 3 million. Later, when Mrs. Wentz took Taler and sighed that they had to live a tighter life, Yudos couldn't help but tell her his plan. Now that he had money, he could leave planet Azarella and find a peaceful planet with a better environment to settle down. The two of them would have to pay a fee of 1 million, and if Taler was included, it would be 1.5 million. The remaining 1.5 million would be enough for him to live for a long time without working. After thinking for a while, Mrs. Wentz agreed. To express her gratitude to Silen, Mrs. Wentz specially prepared a sumptuous dinner. When Silen and Huimao returned, they saw a table full of all kinds of dishes. Yudos was playing with the 2-year-old Taler, and giggles could be heard in the house. At night, Mrs. Wentz took Taler to bed. Yudos sat in the old car parked in the yard and stroked the old rudder that was about to be retired. Hearing the knock on the car hood, Yudos looked up and saw Silen outside the car. He smiled and opened the car hood to let Silen in. After Silen sat in the back seat, Yudos said, "Are you interested in going for a run?" "Okay." The old car jolted in the wind out of the city and flew toward the sandstone area. Stopping behind a large rock, Eudos looked at the sand outside that covered the stars and was silent. He had decided to leave this planet, but he felt a little empty. After leaving, he wouldn't have a chance to race like this again, right? When are you going to complete the procedures to leave Azarella? Scylla suddenly asked. As soon as possible, in case something goes wrong. Although there was some regret, Eudos was still very determined to leave this planet. Scylla nodded. Okay, maybe I can leave with you when the time comes. We should also leave this place. Right, Scylla, what do you do? This question had been in Eudos' heart for a long time. He always felt that Scylla's background was not simple, and people with a talking cat were not ordinary people. And that little sister, Eudos had seen Tang Qiuqiu play with a gun. It was a real gun. What do you think? Scylla did not answer and asked back. Eudos tentatively said, Is it a hunter? Scylla nodded. Wow, it really is a hunter. Didn't you join a hunter group? Eudos said excitedly. He had always been envious of hunters. When he was a child, he fantasized about being a hunter, but later he was forced to race. We joined a hunter regiment. Scylla said calmly. Which hunter regiment? Eudos' eyes lit up. I know a lot of hunter regiments in Sector F. I see. Scylla calmly took out a dagger-shaped emblem. Do you recognize this? After seeing the dagger emblem, Eudos blanked out for a moment. Then he said shakily, can I take a closer look? Scylla handed the emblem over directly. Eudos wiped his hands on his clothes and accepted the emblem. After a long time, he finally said, This isn't fake, is it? Seeing Scylla looking over, Eudos immediately said, No, about that, I've collected pictures of the 4 great hunter regiments' emblems before, but they don't look like this. It's a little different. Oh God, I'm so nervous. Eudos felt like he was saying each word shakily. Oh, this. Maybe it's because you're looking at a normal member's emblem. His tone was still calm. Then this is, the vice commander's. Bang! Agitated, Eudos abruptly stood up and kowtowed to the ground. He ignored the bump on his head. Really? Yes, Qiuqiu also has an emblem. That's a normal member's, so it should be the same as what you said. If Carrie was at the side, he would definitely rush up and beat Scylla up. Keep pretending. You're obviously trying to poach him, but you're acting like you don't have any ideas at all. After reluctantly returning the emblem to Scylla, Eudos drove the old broken car back dizzily. He almost slipped away halfway and crashed into a mountain rock. After the old broken car flew away, a small figure appeared behind the mountain rock. It was Hui Mao who came out to forage for food. This Scylla guy is really sinister. At the same time, in an office on the top floor of the planetary government building, 2 people were sitting. One was Lycrabe, and the other was a man who looked to be in his 40s. Have you really decided? The man asked. Yes, if this continues, this place will really rot. Lycrabe pointed at his heart. Then, have you decided? The man seemed a little worried. Lycrabe nodded, but he had no intention of revealing his plan. He changed the topic and said, The favor you feel you owe me has been repaid after so many years. Don't blame yourself, and don't feel wronged anymore. There will be a new election next year. With your ability, it won't be difficult for you to get promoted. You have enough experience and achievements. 4th young master. No matter what, he was the one who failed to protect Shi Huajing back then. Lycrabe made a stop gesture. 18 years ago, Shi Huajing was already dead. He was brought down to the hell by my dear mother, so the name, 4th young master, no longer exists. Seeing that the man in front of him was still hesitant to speak, Lycrabe sighed. Back then, my mother didn't even want to live. Even if you saved her in the end, she would still find an opportunity to drag everyone around her to hell. She can't blame anyone. Then, 4th young master, will you go back? No, I'll send a message to the old man. If he interferes again this time, I'll destroy all his children. Lycrabe's eyes were filled with cold killing intent. After Lycrabe left, the man finally relaxed and lay down on the chair. His back was already wet. He touched his face and smiled. Fourth young master is still the fourth young master from back then. He always thought that fourth young master didn't know anything, but it turned out that he was just lying to himself. Chapter 159. Right now, Eudos was feeling very conflicted. Ever since Scylla told him about their identity as a member of Vanguard Division 6 Hunter Regiments, Eudos had been thinking about the same thing even in his dreams. But he couldn't let go of his mother and his 2-year-old cousin, so he couldn't help but feel conflicted. Although he was conflicted, Eudos still couldn't stop himself from showing Scylla, Tang Chiochio, and the others the pictures of the Hunter Regiment's emblems. However, he didn't know how to express his thoughts. Eudos felt a little inferior when he heard that the 4 Great Hunter Regiments' recruitment requirements were pretty high. Mrs. Wentz knew her son best. She saw that Eudons had been struggling for the past 2 days and his mouth was full of blisters. She called Eudons into the room and talked to him for 5 hours. 5 hours later, Eudos came out with red eyes, but his eyes were shining with hope. When he finally mustered the courage to tell Scylla that he wanted to join Vanguard Division 6 Hunter Regiments, Scylla finally nodded while Eudos twirled his fingers nervously. However, he said that he could only recommend him. Whether or not he could gain the approval of the B squadrons depended on Eudos' own performance. In response, Eudos floated back downstairs with a silly smile on his face. In Huimao's own words, he was even more foolish than when he found out that he had won 3 million. It's been 2 days. Scylla flicked Huimao's ear. Huimao kicked Scylla's hand away, arched his back and stretched. Alright, let's go look for that loser. When Scylla and Whis arrived at Riculab's house, Riculab was already sitting in the living room waiting for them. When he saw that the medicine jars on the table and the display cabinets had been cleaned up, he knew what Riculab's decision was without saying. Riculab had cleaned himself up quite well today. Although he wasn't as flashy as he was at the night of the dance, compared to his previous decadent appearance, he gave off a much more refreshing feeling. He had also shaved his beard. When he saw Scylla and Huimao come in, Lycrabe pointed at a chair beside him. Sit. Huimao jumped onto the table and proudly walked toward Lycrabe. What do you think? Instead of answering Huimao directly, Lycrabe asked, First, I want to know where you guys are from. Of course, I'm not asking for much. As long as you're not from the military or the government, I'm fine with it. Huimao raised his chin. Alright then, kid. Listen up, we're hunters from Vanguard Division 6. Scylla is the vice-captain of the division. Lycrabe raised his eyebrows. Although he had guessed that this guy was a hunter, he didn't expect him to be from Vanguard, one of the 4 major hunter regiments. Actually, even if Scylla and his team were from a small, unknown hunter regiment, Lycrabe wouldn't have rejected them. Compared to Eudos' agitation, Lycrabe was much calmer. He nodded and asked, Aren't you going to investigate my identity? This question was not answered by Huimao, but by Scylla. Our captain said that as long as you don't betray us, we don't care about where you come from. However, there's one thing I have to say in advance. As the vice-captain, I have the right to recommend you, but whether you can become an official member or a corps member depends on you. Of course, with your abilities, I don't think it'll be difficult. You're quite confident in me. Lycrabe smiled. If I wasn't confident, I wouldn't have let you join. Scylla spread his hands. Right now, the 6th Division was in a period of development and was in urgent need of talented people. Before they parted ways with Schotten and the others, Schotten had told Scylla to not let go of any talented people, lest they be poached by others. So, you agree? Huimao said as he squatted in front of Lycrabe. Yes, we're teammates from now on. Lycrabe stretched out his hand. Hui Mao looked at Lycrabe's outstretched hand and lifted his foot to pat Lycrabe's palm in satisfaction. When do we leave? Lycrabe asked. There's a flight to Transit Planet at noon tomorrow. Let's meet on the plane. Sillin said. Okay. Understanding Sillin's intention, Lycrabe agreed without hesitation. They needed to get rid of some small problems, so they had to prepare a fake identity. However, with Hui Mao, even if they registered with their real identity, when they checked the records, they would find out that it wasn't their original identity. The next day, when Yudos saw Lycrabe on the passenger plane, his jaw dropped. After knowing that Lycrabe was also joining, Yudos was even more excited. Looking at Yudos' sparkling eyes, Mrs. Wentz smiled. Yudos had grown up and there was a bigger world outside. He shouldn't be trapped. Acerella Government Building Office. Did fourth young master leave? Yes. I don't know which flight he took, but none of the flights showed fourth young master's information. The people you asked to follow him didn't record him either. They're not simple people. Fine, fine. Since fourth young master doesn't want people to know, then there's no need to investigate any further. My mission is almost done after I report these things to my superiors. Speaking of which, after Sillin and his entourage arrived at Sector F's transit planet, they searched for some information and found a decent planet. Then, they applied for residence certificates for Mrs. Wentz and Little Taller again. There was a nursery, an elementary school, a good public order, and the neighbors weren't xenophobic. In fact, they were quite friendly. It suited Mrs. Wentz and Little Taller quite well. By sending Little Taro to the nursery during the day, Mrs. Wentz was able to find a more leisurely job. It wasn't much money, but it was easy. Moreover, they had more than 1 million credits in savings. It was more than enough to get by. Yudos didn't bring a single cent with him. He left everything he had to his mother and little cousin brother before leaving the planet with Sillin. Since he had brought Yudos and Lycrabe with him, Sillin did not continue to play around with Tang Qiuqiu. He would bring the 2 new recruits back and deal with them first. He would come out again when he had the time. Sector K, also known as the King's Sector by the Hunters, was a treasured land in the Hunter Circle of the League of Stars. It was the gathering place of the 4 great hunter regiments, and the only sector in the League of Stars dominated by hunter regiments. It was said that the deterrence of the military on this planet was far inferior to that of the 4 great hunters. There were 4 kings here, and they were the 4 great hunters. The closer they got to Sector K, the more nervous Yudos became. Of course, there was also excitement. The 4 great hunters. They used to be a distant fantasy, but now they felt like they were within reach. He wondered what their fleet would be like. Sector K's transit star was located at the outermost edge of Sector K. From this transit star onward, it would be the world of the hunters. There were various hunter regiments' communication departments on the transit star, and the communication departments of the 4 great hunters were buildings even grander than the government buildings on this planet. To the hunters who came to this planet, no one dared to cause trouble in front of the communication department of the 4 great hunters. This was because even if the 4 great hunters killed someone on this planet for no reason, the government would not pursue the matter. As long as the 4 great hunters did not destroy the planet, the government would not even bother to intervene. Neither the military nor the political organizations cared about the matters between hunters. However, people from the business circle came frequently. After all, there were a lot of partnerships between merchants and hunters, especially between some big business families such as the Duance family. After Sillin checked the location of Vanguard's communication department on the navigator, he led the group there. There were no restrictions on firearms on this planet, so it was not strange to see a lot of people carrying standard firearms on the streets. There were even people carrying shoulder cannons and quivers. Unlike other planets, anyone who came to this planet would feel a strong aura of toughness. After all, most of the hunters were hunters, and the aura they exuded was very strong. Don't be fooled by those who looked kind and easy to bully at the bar counter of a small restaurant, or those who were so thin and weak that they looked like they could be blown away by a gust of wind. Those people might be your seniors, but they had toned down their aura after they retired. There was a saying called returning to one's natural state, and this was the principle behind it. If you really provoked them, your throat would be crushed before you could even pull out your gun, and you might even die without a complete corpse. Although they had decided to eat at Vanguard's communication department, the logistics department of each hunter regiment's communication department had excellent preferential policies for their members. Tang Qiuqiu saw an ice cream cup displayed on the display window. Although the name ended with the word cup, that cup was more or less the size of a small bucket. Moreover, it looked very good and attracted a lot of sweets lovers. Tang Qiuqiu was one of the people who was attracted by it at first glance. Because of her own savings and the money she won from the racing competition, Tang Qiuqiu could be considered quite wealthy now. After buying an ice cream cup, Tang Qiuqiu bought a glass of fruit juice for Silin and the others, and a milk tea for Huimao. In this place, many shops did not like to use service robots, preferring to use human labor instead. After all, robots were not as useful as humans when it came to handling disputes. Once a fight broke out, it was still broken, and it was expensive for robots to repair it. In order to save money, it was better to use human labor. The owner of the dessert shop was a woman. Since the shop was not big, there were not many customers. Although it was unknown if the owner had hired other waitresses, at least she was the only one at the moment. The owner looked like she was in her 30s, but no one knew her real age, and no one would ask. After all, it was very impolite to ask a woman's age. The owner liked Tang Qiuqiu very much. She specially made a big cup for Tang Qiuqiu, and added some fresh fruits and honey juice. Tang Qiuqiu did not forget to thank the owner. This was basic courtesy. Moreover, Tang Qiuqiu did not dislike this charming and friendly owner. Since they were not in a hurry, Silin and the others just sat in the shop and drank it before leaving. Qiuqiu, how do you feel about this planet? Silin asked. It's pretty good. I can shoot freely. Tang Qiuqiu was very satisfied with this. Silin was speechless. Yudo's nervousness was greatly relieved by the glass of fruit juice, but the excitement and nervousness in his eyes were unmistakable. This is a hunter's paradise. Yudos exclaimed. Many hunters like to wear their clan's emblem on their bodies. The members of the top hunter regiments would be even more arrogant when they saw the members of the weaker hunter regiments. The act of wearing an emblem had gradually become a trend, and it was also a way for hunters to compare themselves with each other. Because of this, a rule that did not need to be described in words was formed: if my hunter regiment is stronger than you, I'm superior to you. Bullying the weak and the strong was a common thing here. There were many conflicts, but no one would get involved. They just surrounded and watched. The hunter regiments had their own standpoints. As they were talking about the situation on this planet, Silin saw a familiar figure. The person also felt his gaze and turned to look at him. Yo! It's you, kid. The people behind Bart saw their respected senior rushing to the dessert shop as if he was seeing an old friend, not a junior. Senior Bart. Silin stood up and pulled a chair for Bart. Bart did not stand on ceremony. He sat down and patted Silin's shoulder a few times. He laughed so hard that his beard was shaking. The people who followed him saw Bart's reaction and re-evaluated Silin. He looked like a young junior. Why would Senior Bart have such a reaction? Could he be a descendant of the A-Team? That could not be right. Even if he was a descendant of the A-Team, Bart would not act like this. Eskeri, my dear, please give me a glass of sweet wine with ice. Bart waved at the female owner of the shop. From their tone, it was obvious that the two were familiar with each other. Eskeri glanced at Bart and took a bottle of sweet wine from the counter and threw it at Bart. Don't put it on credit this time. Hee, I won't. I'll just put it on this kid's tab, Bart said as he pointed at Silin. Escary leaned on the counter and her voluptuous chest was almost pressed against the counter. She raised her slender finger and pointed at Tang Kakikyu, who was busy digging into her ice cream cup. She smiled and said, "This little girl is paying the bill this time. You, an old man, still need a little kid to pay for you?" Bart blushed. Just when he was about to speak, Tang Kakikyu raised her head and said, "How much is a bottle of sweet wine?" "Ahem, no need, 1,000 galactic credits," Escary interrupted Bart and said with a smile while holding her chin. Tang Kakikyu tilted her head and bit her spoon as she pondered. She nodded and said to Escary, "It's not too expensive. Let's add it to Grandpa Bart's tab." "Io, Tang Chocho, sweetheart, you're so cute." Bart grabbed his beard and swept it across Tang Chocho's little face, causing the people behind Bart to shudder. However, before Tang Chocho could brush Bart's beard away, Hui Mao leaped up and grabbed Bart's beard to swing on it. "Hee hee, little Wheeze, you've become heavier again," she said as she raised her hand to stroke Hui Mao's hair. The mouths of the people behind Bart turned into O shapes. Escary narrowed her eyes and looked at Sillin and the others with a meaningful look. One had to know that Bart treasured his beard very much. No one should even think about touching a single strand of his beard. Whoever touched it would get angry. However, not only did Bart use his beard to tease Tang Chocho, he was also caressing the cat that was swinging on his beard. What was going on? Not only that, there was still some milk tea stuck to the corner of Hui Mao's mouth after he drank the milk tea. He rubbed it directly on Bart's beard. Bart only smiled and said, "You're really naughty, little guy." The people behind him were so shocked that their jaws almost dropped. Bart held the sweet wine in one hand and stroked Hui Mao's hair with the other. He glanced at the restless Yudos and the calm Lycrabe. "A newcomer?" Sillin nodded. "I brought him here to recommend him." "Would you like to inspect him, sir?" "Io, Sillin. Can a person you recommend be bad?" Bart had a high opinion of Sillin. He then asked, "What are your names, little guys?" Normally speaking, those who were not officially recognized as members of the hunter regiments were not qualified to be introduced to the seniors of the regiment. That was why Sillin had not introduced Yudos and Lycrabe until now. But now that Bart had taken the initiative to ask, it meant that he, Bart, had acknowledged the duo's identity in advance. The decision-makers of the B squadrons would have to think twice if they wanted to object. They would not go against a senior like Bart. Of course, Yudos and Lycrabe did not know about this hidden rule. However, the people who came with Bart were looking at Sillin with even stranger gazes. Just who the hell is this kid? Yudos and Lycrabe briefly introduced themselves. Yudos said that his original class was Flying Driver, and Lycrabe was Apothecary. Yudos' flying skills are amazing, Tang Chocho said while licking her ice cream spoon. Tang Chocho had long since regarded Yudos as one of her own, and Tang Chocho was very protective of her own people. Lycrabe may not be as good as me, but he's still passable, Hui Mao also said proudly. Bart hummed in satisfaction. Tang Chocho looked at the people standing behind Bart while digging her ice cream. They should all be Vanguard's people, right? Although they couldn't be counted as one of their own, they were still related to each other to a certain extent. She asked, "Why don't you sit down?" "That's right. It's so stressful to just stand there," Bart said with a blaming look. Those people cursed in their hearts at the same time. Who would dare to sit down without your permission? Seeing that they had sat down, Tang Chocho asked again, "Do you guys want to drink anything? As long as it's not too expensive, I'll pay." No need, no need. We're not thirsty. I don't really eat sweets." The few people waved their hands. What a joke. How could they ask a child to pay? They were not as thick-skinned as Senior Bart. Ignore them. Bart reached out to rub Tang Chocho's head before looking at Sillin. "The regiment is looking for you. There's a mission, and it's pretty difficult. I think your vacation is about to be over." "Mission?" Scylla frowned. What kind of mission could it be that even someone like Bart would need it? I'll contact the commander as soon as possible. Seriously, Shotten doesn't have the right to ask about this. You'll know when you get back. Bart finished the rest of his beer in one gulp and put down the bottle. I'm heading over there. I came back for an urgent matter this time. If I don't go over now, Big Hat will start babbling again. Scylla knew that Bart was talking about the planet at Sector Z where a few types of energy ores were mined, and the Big Hat he was referring to was Songba Leruo, who was wearing a wide-brimmed hat. Is everything alright over there? Yes, it's pretty good. You'll even get a bonus this time. Alright, it's time to go. You better think about this mission carefully, kid. After blowing Escary a kiss, Bart left with his men. Scylla swirled the juice in his glass and pondered. What kind of mission is it? Judging from Bart's tone, it's not going to be easy this time. Chapter 160. After finishing their cold drinks and resting for a while, Scylla and the others bade farewell to Asheri. Asheri even gave Tang Qiuqiu 2 boxes of biscuits and a discount card so that she could visit again in the future. After leaving the dessert shop, Scylla launched his hoverboard. Before this, Yudos wasn't familiar with hoverboards. After all, there were just too few places on planet Acerella that were suitable for hoverboards, and Wind City was a place where sandstorms often filled the sky. Riding on a hoverboard was a suicide mission. Therefore, to Yudos, he had never touched a hoverboard before he left Acerella sector. However, since he had good balance and learned quickly, it didn't take long for him to get used to it. Lycrabe, on the other hand, often came into contact with hoverboards before he arrived at Acerella, so it wasn't much of a problem for him. After activating the hoverboard, the group flew up to the hoverboard passage and headed towards Vanguard's liaison department. The liaison departments of the 4 major hunter regiments were located in 4 different locations on the planet. They were practically the dominant forces in these 4 areas. Around these 4 liaison departments, there were also some smaller hunter regiments that had a good relationship with the hunter regiment's liaison department. The communication department of the Vanguard Hunter Group had a projection of the dagger-shaped emblem floating in the air, indicating the direction and distance. There were also some other Hunter Group AI road signs around, but compared to Vanguard's AI guidance, they were much smaller. This was the advantage of a large group. There was no need to search the map or ask around. They could easily find the magnificent building by following the AI's directions. The building could be seen from afar. It was roughly shaped like a dagger, just like the Hunter Regiment's insignia. There were also a few low-rise buildings around it that were used for other matters. Tang Qiuqiu took out her own insignia, and Scylla did the same with his vice commander's insignia. This was a common practice. Otherwise, it would be hard to explain if they were accidentally injured. When the 2 of them took out their insignia, the expressions of the people around them softened a little, but it was mixed with curiosity. After all, Tang Qiuqiu was too young as an official member, and Scylla was too young as AB Squadron's vice commander. The crowd couldn't help but express their suspicions. There was a reception desk in the middle of the lobby on the 1st floor of the Vanguard Liaison Department. The lobby was filled with hunters, and most of them had the Vanguard insignia on them. When Scylla and the others walked in, no one paid any attention to them at first. But later on, someone inadvertently caught a glimpse of the emblem on Tang Qiuqiu and Scylla's body, and gradually began to whisper to each other. Although it was a whisper, their voices weren't exactly soft. Even in a noisy environment, people 10 meters away could hear them. These people directly voiced out their suspicions. However, when they saw that it was the 6th Division, they had a strange look in their eyes. After all, the 6th Division had been in the limelight a while ago. The reward for the home team had already been announced. Although some people were not convinced, they could not say anything about the final reward for the home team. They didn't say it out in the open, but they didn't have to be so taboo in private. As long as there weren't any big shots from the home team present, they could say whatever they wanted. At most, they would just fight. If you win, fine, you're capable, I'm convinced. If you lose, I'm sorry, I just don't like you. I'll beat you up every time I see you. The higher-ups of Vanguard only thought of the squabbles between the B squadrons as nothing more than squabbles between the B squadrons. Squabbling was healthier, and competition promoted progress. Therefore, as long as it wasn't too big of a ruckus, they would turn a blind eye to it. This was especially true for the B squadron leaders who had promised their own squad members that as long as they won, they would bear all the consequences. As a result, there were a lot of people in the hall who couldn't stand the sight of Silen's vice commander badge no matter how they looked at it. A couple of people who had vice commander badges from other squads were even rubbing their palms together. Motherfucker, it took me more than a dozen years to climb up to this position. How is this stupid kid worthy of this badge? As they thought about it, some people walked up to them. They didn't hide their thoughts on their faces. They might be smiling, but their smiles were asking for a beating no matter how you looked at them. Yo, why is there a little girl here? Little girl, you're at least 10 years old, aren't you? A brawny man more than 2 meters tall said loudly as he walked towards them. Beside him was a slightly shorter person who also looked difficult to deal with. He was twirling a boomerang in his hand with great vigor. When he saw that Silen and the others were ignoring him and continuing to advance, the brawny man pursed his lips and swept a disdainful glance at Silen and the others. Then, he rolled his eyes and took out a big lollipop. He said, "Little girl, here's something delicious for you. Do you want this?" Bang! The brawny man's words came to an abrupt halt. The people who were about to laugh out loud heard the brawny man's words suddenly froze in their throats. The big lollipop that was originally in the brawny man's hand had snapped from the spot where the brawny man's fingers were gripping. The brawny man's fingers weren't harmed at all, and the lollipop with the lollipop was thrown high into the air by the force of the snap. It spun towards Tang Qiuqiu and finally landed accurately on Tang Qiuqiu's hand. The bullet finally shot into the trash bin in the corner and didn't hurt anyone else. Tang Qiuqiu held the lollipop in her hand, tore open the wrapper, and stuck her head out to lick it. She smacked her lips and commented, "It tastes pretty good. This is really just a 10-year-old girl." Many people were shocked by this scene. First, this little girl actually dared to open fire in the lobby of Vanguard? They had never seen anyone who dared to do something like this before. Even if they had heard of a few cases, this was definitely not a bad example. Furthermore, not everyone dared to act so recklessly. If something happened, it would implicate the vice captain. The people in Vanguard could fight and settle things on the spot. They could also compete in marksmanship, but most of them would go to the shooting range of the liaison department. But for a person who didn't even have the rank of vice captain to open fire in a place like the first-floor lobby without even thinking, where did she get the courage to do so? And with so many people present, not a single one of them felt a murderous aura. No, they didn't even feel the aura locking onto them in the instant before the shot was fired. Second, this little girl's marksmanship was too good. Not only did she break the stick, but she also didn't hurt anyone else. In the end, she was able to shoot into the trash bin. Such marksmanship was indeed very good. Furthermore, after shooting the stick, she was able to let the lollipop fall into her hands. Not only did she intimidate the other party, but she also received her own benefits. It had to be said that this move was quite beautiful. Third, and also what many people were conflicted about. Tang Qiuqiu's bullet ricocheted. This meant that the bullet bounced off the target after a few ricochets. Such a small child could actually shoot a ricocheted bullet so easily. What a strike! Tang Qiuqiu couldn't achieve the effect she wanted by shooting in a straight line. Even if she could shoot in a curve, the curve was very limited and still not enough to meet her needs. So in the end, Tang Qiuqiu chose to shoot a ricocheted bullet. According to what Silen had said before, in the Vanguard's liaison department, the building materials would definitely be different. After walking into the hall and observing the situation here, she had some thoughts. Not bad. She shot a ricocheted bullet and got a lollipop. Tang Qiuqiu was very satisfied. In fact, in addition to the amazement of the surrounding people, Yudos and Lycrabe were even more amazed. The Tang Qiuqiu that they usually saw was just an ordinary little sister. She would complain, be a little awkward, and be as excited as other children when she saw new things around her. She was just a little girl who liked to eat sweets. But now it seemed that those who could match that emblem were not ordinary people, even if she was a little girl about 10 years old. Thank you, uncle. Tang Qiuqiu did not forget to express her gratitude after licking the Bang Bang Tang. This was purely a polite formula. She did not really mean to thank him, but no one cared about this. Ha, it seems that I have underestimated you. No wonder you can become an official member at such a young age. Very good. The brawny man was stunned for a moment before he laughed. He no longer looked down on them and continued to walk towards Silen's group. The person next to the brawny man walked directly in front of Lycrabe and glanced up and down at Lycrabe. From the beginning, he could not bear to see Lycrabe like this. Are you trying to act cool? The person spun the boomerang in one hand and patted Lycrabe with the other. He said with a fake smile, but this person doesn't seem to have an emblem. Could it be that he is not a member of Vanguard? Sigh, don't be discouraged. Although a little girl who is so much younger than you is also very capable, don't be too discouraged. The person patted Lycrabe's shoulder a little hard, and it made a loud sound. However, Lycrabe stood firmly and did not move a single step. Seeing that Lycrabe was able to withstand such a force, the person was about to praise him. However, when he saw that Lycrabe was still too lazy to care about him, he suddenly became angry again. He put more force on Lycrabe's shoulder and said, "You are a new reserve member, right? When you see a senior, you should know the necessary manners of a hunter." Silen curled his lips. What was the necessary manners of a hunter? In summary, it could be summed up in 4 words: the strong are respected. Although the brawny man looked much stronger than the person, in fact, in terms of strength, the brawny man was definitely no match for the person. Many people's first impression of the person was that he was an agile type, but the truth was that the person was a strength type. Therefore, people were already certain that Lycrabe could withstand the person's strength just now. However, they did not mind watching Lycrabe's reaction after the person increased his strength. The reality was out of everyone's expectations. Lycrabe did not have any reaction at all. Even his expression did not change. The one who had a reaction was that person. The person's hand on Lycrabe's shoulder began to expand rapidly. What was clearly a strong and well-defined palm became a big, meaty palm that was thicker than a bear's paw in a few seconds. The 5 fingers were no longer what they used to be, and the meaty palm looked very comical. Most importantly, the person did not feel any pain at all. The nerves in the hand seemed to have become numb, or the nerve conduction was blocked, and it could not transmit the real feeling of the changes in the palm to the brain. The change in the palm was just the beginning. As the palm expanded, slowly, the wrist also began to thicken, and then the arm, as if there was an inflator pumping air into it. When the swelling expanded to the shoulder, the person gradually lost control of the arm, and it drooped down powerlessly. Seeing such a scene, the surrounding people unconsciously touched their own arms, feeling the state of their arms, for fear that such a thing would happen to them. Hey, kid! The brawny man took a big step towards Lycrabe, but was stopped by Silen's hand. The brawny man wanted to push away Silen's hand in front of him, but found that no matter how hard he tried, he could not move the hand at all. The brawny man knew that this time he had really met a tough opponent. A person who could wear the vice-captain's emblem was definitely not weak. Another thing he learned today was that whether or not he could have the emblem of an official member, and whether or not he could hold the position of vice-captain, had nothing to do with age. Taking a deep breath, the brawny man looked up at Silen, and saw that the young vice-captain still had a faint smile on his face. It could not be considered distant, nor could it be considered friendly. The good thing was that there was no malice or disgust towards their provocation. This was a good sign for the brawny man. "Brother, this time we made a mistake. It was our fault, sorry. I hope you can help solve this, my brother's problem." Scylla looked at Lycrabe, and Lycrabe shrugged. "It's okay, it will be fine in a while. It won't affect his body." Scylla turned back to the brawny man and said, "Then it's not a big problem, it's just a small prank. Don't worry. Don't worry. Don't worry my ass. If your hand was in such a state, would you still be able to keep a straight face?" The brawny man and the other person felt bitter in their hearts. Was there such a prank? If they saw this guy in the future, they would definitely run as far away as possible. However, for Scylla, he had seen people with swollen arms who still had a playful appearance. For example, Andryra's eldest son, Lung. Indeed, as Lycrabe said, the swelling of the man's hand was limited to his shoulder and arm. After 2 minutes, the swelling began to slowly subside, and after 5 minutes, it had returned to its original shape. Although there were still some wrinkles on the skin, they would soon disappear. The man turned over his hand and looked at Lycrabe with a strange expression. "You can't be one of those high achievers who specializes in this area, right?" Seeing that the man's attitude did not have the resentment of the small eyes, but was rather calm, Lycrabe did not put on a face and smiled. "No, I haven't even received intermediate education." That was even more terrifying. Everyone thought. To be able to reach such a level by relying on himself without even receiving intermediate education, he was either a genius or a freak. Wouldn't he be even more powerful if he received higher education in the future? Or if he didn't receive higher education, he might even be able to publish some results in electronic pharmacology journals with high contribution points if he continued to ponder. It seemed that the people from the 6th Division were quite capable. How did the 6th Division manage to find such a talent? Just when everyone was thinking about it, a woman in her 20s who had been watching the show from the front desk smiled and walked over. Her perky buttocks that were wrapped in a short skirt swayed rhythmically with her steps. However, when the other hunters saw this woman, they quickly looked away and started to talk about a random topic. It seemed as if they did not notice what was happening here at all. The burly man and his companions smiled awkwardly and ran away. Before they ran, they mouthed, "Be careful." It seemed that this woman had a special status here and would not be easy to deal with. However, contrary to what everyone thought, the woman who walked over said with a warm smile, "You are Scylla, Wheeze, Tang Chio, Lycrabe, and Udos, right? Senior Bart just told me to treat you well. The restaurant has already prepared your meals. If there's anything else you need, feel free to ask. I'll bring you there." After saying that, she made a "please" gesture. The behavior of the female boss on the first floor of the liaison department, who looked like a beauty from afar but was actually a ferocious bandit, made everyone's jaws drop. Since when did this female bandit become so polite? Someone counted with his fingers. The female boss had mentioned 5 names, so there were only 4 people in the group. Where was the last one? In fact, Hui Mao was sleepy after drinking his fill at the dessert shop. He had been sleeping on Scylla's shoulder. As long as it wasn't a big deal, he wouldn't even bother to lift his eyelids. Scylla felt that this woman was quite interesting. Even though she said that Senior Bart had informed them in advance, she still watched the people around them provoke them and only came out after watching the show. As expected, this was how hunters dealt with each other. The woman glanced at Hui Mao, who was sleeping on Scylla's shoulder, and said with a smile, "We've specially prepared some fish. There's steamed, fried, boiled, fried, and braised." Yes, fish was a big deal. Therefore, Hui Mao's ears caught the right keywords. He slowly woke up, stretched, and yawned. "I'm hungry. Let's go eat." The woman covered her mouth and laughed. She said to Hui Mao, "How does Wheeze feel about this place?" "Feel?" Scratching his ear, Hui Mao said lazily, I don't know. I'm asleep. Everyone, as expected, he was completely ignored. After the woman brought Silin and the others to the restaurant, she was pulled by someone when she came out. The person asked carefully, Hey, boss, who are those people? Even the first floor's boss didn't have to be so polite to the team leader. The woman shrugged helplessly. I can't help it. Senior Bart has personally told me to treat them well. I can't cause too much trouble. The person who had come came to a realization. So it was Senior Bart. No wonder boss didn't cause any trouble today. He just watched the show. Speaking of which, after Silin quickly finished his food, he requested to speak to the people in the 6th division. The person in charge of communication was clearly prepared. He directly contacted the main control room of the 6th division and told Shotten that he had returned with 2 recommendations. Shotten was obviously very happy. However, there was still some worry in Silin's eyes, so he asked Silin to meet up with them as soon as possible. There were important matters to discuss. After ending the call with Shotten, Silin thought about the worried look in Shotten's eyes. It was clearly related to the mission that Bart had mentioned. After thinking for a while, Silin contacted the control room of his team's starship. When the call was connected, the first thing that appeared was Carrie's big face. Silin, I've missed you so much. No, let's do it again. Vice Captain Silin, we've missed you so much. Silin had the urge to kick him right now. Before Silin could say anything, Carrie continued to speak excitedly, and my dear Wheeze, cute Chocho, I've missed you so much. Someone was squeezing Carrie from the side, and it was Xiao Shang's voice. Do took the opportunity to jump in front of the communicator, but was flung away by Carrie by the tail. It clung to the entire communicator panel and refused to budge. He continued to shout excitedly, Chocho, your eggs have hatched. Really? Tang Chocho's face was almost completely covered by the communicator. She couldn't wait. Chapter 161. That's right. Hey, Yudi, hurry up and get that fur ball over here. Carrie turned his head and roared to the side. Not long after, they saw Carrie pick up a white fur ball the size of a soccer ball and pinch it. That fellow seemed to still be sleeping, curled up into a ball like a hedgehog. After being disturbed by Carrie and waking up, it slowly recovered from its ball shape. Its entire body was snow white, but its eyes were silver. Its mouth and nose were still a faint pink, probably because it was still in its infancy. It opened its hazy, unfocused eyes and let out a big yawn. It blinked at the projection on the communicator, and its originally drooping round ears perked up as it whimpered. Huimao's beard trembled. This fellow, at a glance, can sleep even more than me, and it's so fat. Tang Chocho stared at the white and fat thing excitedly. She really wanted to return to the team right now. Chocho, this little fellow might have eaten already. When you come back, you have to reimburse its food expenses. Also, buy more food while you're at it. This fellow eats everything. Beside them, Yudos and Lycrabe were speechless. How could such a fellow with such a wide appetite not be fat? Okay, I'll buy a lot of things. Tang Chocho immediately agreed. Right, this little fellow hasn't given it a name yet. It's waiting for you, its real owner. But before it officially gets a name, everyone calls it Tang Chocho frowned. Why did it sound a little weird? Okay, I'll think about what to name it in the next 2 days. After the conversation, Silin disconnected. Otherwise, with someone like Carrie, it would be possible for him to hoard the communicator and talk for an entire day. Hurry up, let's set off immediately. Hee, my egg hatched. It finally hatched. When Tang Chocho had parted ways with Silin and the rest of the team, Yudi had said that it might take more than half a year or more before the egg hatched. That was why Tang Chocho hadn't brought the egg with her all this time, and had left it inside the incubation room instead. She didn't think that the egg would hatch before half a year was up. It was a pleasant surprise indeed. However, when Tang Qiuqiu came out, some people around her looked at her with a strange expression. They even looked at Tang Qiuqiu carefully, as if they were trying to see if this little girl was a normal human being. It couldn't be helped. Tang Qiu's words were too ambiguous. What do you mean by your eggs have hatched? Isn't this just making people think that you're a non-mammal? Due to Tang Qiuqiu's impatience and Shatan's request to Silin to return as soon as possible, the few of them temporarily adjusted their arrangements to be more compact. They were not in the mood to stroll around. Tang Qiuqiu was not stingy with money. Only 1% of the money spent on missions and flying car bets was enough for her to buy a lot of food. The communication department had a starship that went to the stronghold. After registering, Silin and the others boarded the starship that went to the spaceport. Yudos and Riculab hadn't spoken a word since the beginning. Yudos was probably just nervous, but Riculab didn't show it on his face, and Silin could more or less guess what he was thinking. Yudos was probably just nervous, but Riculab didn't show it on his face. Do you think that Vanguard, one of the legendary four greats, is only a so-so? Silin looked at Lycrabe with a smile. When Yudos heard Silin's words, he also looked at Lycrabe. He did not think that way, but what did Lycrabe mean? Did he regret it? In response to Silin's question, Lycrabe only shook his head and said nothing. Actually, these are just small squabbles to the people of Vanguard. They may look at us with disdain or contempt, but if they were facing other squadrons, it would be hostility and true malice. Moreover, these people are just the lowest level members of Vanguard, and they are only from the various B squadrons. The A squadron has no time to loiter around here at all. There are also a few veterans in the hall, but they did not fight. They just watched as bystanders. Otherwise, these people would not have ended with a small squabble. They would have dragged them to spar on the spot. Truth be told, after the scene in the hall, Lycrabe did feel that the legendary four greats were only a so-so. But after hearing Silin's words, he understood Vanguard a little more. He thought of Bart. Even when she was laughing and teasing Huimao and Tang Kakikiu, she gave him a strong feeling. Although the woman in the hall on the first floor of the communication department also gave him a strong feeling, she was still a long way off from Bart. Maybe that was the difference between A squadron and a division. Silin, when are we going to join the A squadron? Huimao said while stroking his beard. Silin patted Huimao's cat head and said, "It's not that easy. We still have to accumulate merits, and Diaz was the one who gave up the position of vice commander." But speaking of Diaz, Tang Qiuqiu's excitement subsided a little. I wonder how Big Brother Diaz is doing. He's fine. Carrie and the others seem to be in a good mood. I believe that the treatment over there should be going well, Silin said. Tang Qiuqiu finally smiled. Amen. He said that as long as Big Sister Asha is by his side, he will be fine. How can you believe that kind of nonsense? Before Huimao could finish, he was slapped back by Silin. Huimao was so angry that he jumped up and slapped Silin's head. Before they arrived at their destination, Silin told them some simple things about the 6th squad so that they could have a more accurate understanding of them. However, it wasn't very detailed, and some things couldn't be said for the time being because their identities hadn't been officially recognized yet. Only after they were officially recognized and given their badges would they be told some deeper things. This was a rule. Just like how Silin still did not have the right to know about certain things about the A squadron. The A squadron. Silin thinks that if Bart and Shatan were mentioned, could it be that this matter involved the A squadron? Even as Silin's immediate superior, Shatan, did not have the right to ask about it. Did that mean that the decision was made by someone higher up? Vanguard's stronghold was located on a planet, Planet KJ-100. One could tell the importance of this planet just by looking at its code, and the planet that served as their stronghold was called Planet Vanguard. In reality, The entire J sector of Sector K was Vanguard's territory, and Planet K, J-100 was the core of the planet. After a starship arrived at the spaceport outside of Planet K, J-100, it would take different spaceships depending on the planet's destination. Planet K, J-100 was mostly the A Squadron's territory, and the B Squadrons were not allowed to enter this area without notice or permission. Outside of this area was the other B Squadron's territory, and the B Squadrons were free to move around in their own territory. Silen was going to take the spaceship to the 6th Division with Tang Qiuqiu and the others, but he was stopped the moment he got off the starship. It was the people sent by the A Squadron. They were here to pick up Silen and Hui Mao and bring them to the A Squadron. Perhaps it was because their superiors had instructed them to treat Silen fairly well. At the very least, they did not look down on or provoke Silen because of his age. Instead, they looked at him with curiosity. Left with no choice, Silen had no choice but to let Tang Qiuqiu take Yudos and Lycrabe to the 6th Division. After all, only Tang Qiuqiu had an emblem among the three of them, and sometimes an emblem was a very effective pass. Otherwise, two undocumented people like Yudos and Lycrabe would be caught, thrown into jail and tortured before they could even explain themselves in Vanguard's stronghold. Silen followed the group and landed at the A Squadron's alleyway. The moment he got off the spaceship, he saw Shotten waiting for him. There wasn't much joy on his face, and there was even worry in his eyes when he looked at Silen. "Captain." Silen raised his hand in greeting. Shotten smiled. "I heard that you've recruited 2 good rookies to the team this time." "Very good. You're quite efficient." The few people who had sent Silen there bade farewell and left. Another group of people took Silen and Shotten to a modified flying car and brought them to a building. Shotten said that it was a rather special place that was specially used to discuss matters. Even in the A Squadron, those who did not have certain qualifications could not enter. Silen curled his lips in his heart. In that case, he was really indebted to those people. When they walked into the building, Shotten sighed and said softly, "If you don't want to, don't accept this mission." "I know." Silen gestured for Shotten to rest assured. When they arrived in front of a conference room, Shotten was stopped. Only Silen and Hui Mao could enter. Shotten said that he would wait in the lounge around the corner. Silen nodded. When he walked to the door, it opened automatically and he stepped in. Seeing the closed door, Shotten had mixed feelings. It wasn't easy to have such a talent in the team. It wasn't easy for the 6th Division to have such an opportunity to develop. He really didn't want anything to happen to this talent, especially to Silen. Diaz had said that Silen would bring the 6th Division to a glorious peak. Therefore, even though Shotten didn't fully understand the situation this time, he could guess where the mission was from. Was that a place that a vice-captain of a small team could go? When Silen and Hui Mao walked into the conference room, their eyelids twitched. "What's this idiot doing here?" Standing on Silen's shoulder, the gray cat stared with its mouth wide open at the neatly dressed man who was drinking tea on a chair with a serious expression. The man looked a little gentlemanly but didn't lose his tough edge. It seriously suspected that the hooligan it had met before was actually a twin brother. When he saw Silen enter, Lung, who had a serious look on his face, nodded with a perfect smile. Silen and Hui Mao felt their hairs stand on end. This idiot must have done something wrong. There were a few unfamiliar people sitting at the table in the conference room. However, from the emblems they were wearing, it was obvious that they had a lot of power in the A Division. "You're Silen and Hui's, right? Sit, don't be nervous." One of them smiled kindly and pointed to an empty chair. This time, it wasn't like the time when Bart and Songba Leruo tampered with the chairs. It was obvious that not everyone in the A Division was as bored as Bart to gamble on the performance of their juniors. Silen and Hui Mao weren't nervous. After Silen bowed to the elders, he calmly walked over to pull out a chair and sat down. Meanwhile, Hui Mao jumped onto the table and sniffed the tea in front of Silen. He stuck out his tongue and licked it. After savoring the taste, he felt that it was pretty good. He ignored the people around him and finished licking the tea in the cup. When he was done, he raised his head and looked around. Is there any more? I haven't even had a sip of water on the way here. The members of Vanguard laughed and asked someone to fill it up. They then took out another cup and placed the entire pot next to it. From their expressions, it seemed that they valued Huimao more than Silen. Silen said that he didn't mind. The more they valued him, the more secure Huimao's safety would be. At the very least, Vanguard would be able to put up a strong front against the military and some crazy research organizations. After all, Silen's current abilities were limited. He couldn't influence the entire Vanguard hunter group. He couldn't even get some of the information he needed. Sigh, there's still a long way to go. Young Master Lung didn't say anything. He just twirled the cup in his hand in a mysterious manner. A person who seemed to be the person in charge of Vanguard gave a brief explanation and then passed an electronic notebook to Silen. The relevant mission introduction and explanation were all listed in it. Silen took the electronic notebook and swiped his finger across it. The speed at which he changed surprised the people around him. They didn't expect this kid to be so capable. In reality, they didn't know that Silen had slowed down his speed. If they were to look at it at full speed, they might be so shocked that their front teeth would fall off. When he saw the word Sector S on the electronic notebook, Silen immediately recalled the things mentioned in Enji's diary. Yes, it had been 50 years. Sector S was a prison sector that everyone in the galaxy would pale at the mention of its name. All the notorious criminals in the galaxy were imprisoned there, and many of the prisoners were once famous figures in the sector. Since Sector S was synonymous with cages and criminals, Sector S was known as the darkest place in the League of Stars. Sector S wasn't big, and it had very few habitable planets. However, every planet was a hellish place. Some people said that ghosts wailed and wolves howled all year round, and there were countless vengeful spirits and wraiths. Sector S was a place where prisoners from various sectors were imprisoned. Among these prisoners were hunters, merchants, government and military officials. The army stationed there was actually another form of army. The League of Stars' military had a much smaller influence on them. Silen remembered that Knight once said that these people couldn't even be considered soldiers. The reason why so many innocent people died in prison was because of the direct actions of the people stationed on the prison planet or the prison guards. Cold, numb, and murderous. It was all too common to describe the people who guarded the prison. The reason some big forces, big business groups, big families, influential politicians and military bigwigs were able to survive after being sentenced to prison at Sector S was because these forces had infiltrated and taken care of each other in Sector S. One of the main reasons why Sector S was said to be special was because of its complexity. Someone once said that they saw a man who was sentenced to prison a few decades ago become a prison guard straight away after his sentence was over. There were also some people like this in the military stationed there. It was common for the forces to take care of their own people, suppress other forces, and even assassinate them countless times. Everyone there was powerful and experienced in the battlefield. They all had their own abilities. Those without strength would only die if they went in. It was no wonder that Shoten would be worried. Even Shoten himself wasn't confident that he could guarantee his own safety in that place. However, what surprised Silen after reading through the information was that the Andryra family was the one who suggested this mission, and they specifically asked Silen and Huimao to accept it. If Silen accepted it, then the deal was done. If he refused, then Andryra wouldn't look for anyone else in Vanguard. The people imprisoned in Sector S were about to be released, weren't they? The A squad should have made their decision already, but they were definitely elites. They wouldn't let Silen go. Come to think of it, it made sense. Their own men would definitely send a highly trusted A squad elite to the Vanguard imprisoned at Sector S. There was no way they would let Silen, who was still a young sprout in their eyes. They were still skeptical of Silen's abilities, but this matter was extremely important. There was no way they would let a newbie go. The A squad had a different opinion about Andryra's matter. Although they wouldn't give this mission to Scylla, Scylla could accept missions from others. There were pros and cons to this, but since Scylla's position in Vanguard wasn't high yet, there weren't too many objections. They also wanted to take this opportunity to see just how capable the person recommended by Bart and Songba Leruo was. Scylla didn't agree immediately after returning the electronic record book. Instead, he said, "I'd like to talk to the Andryra family alone about this mission before I decide whether or not to accept it." The person in charge of Vanguard didn't object either. This large conference room was connected to a small conference room, and it was specially prepared for those who needed a separate discussion. Seeing Lung nod, the person in charge of Vanguard pressed a button, and a small door appeared on the wall that looked similar to the surroundings. Scylla Helong walked in, and Andryra's other men were stopped by Lung. Berzet was one of them, and although he didn't go in, Berzet shot Lung a look before he closed the door. "Don't be too sloppy, and pay attention to your image." Lung pretended not to see it. The moment the door closed, Lung immediately revealed his true form. He kicked off his shoes and threw his coat aside. Half lying on the chair, he huffed and sighed, "I'm so tired. Look, my toes are about to get blisters. Slippers are still the best." Lung didn't get down to business right from the start. He vented his belly full of grievances for more than 10 minutes, but he still looked like he was going to continue. Scylla kicked him, "Hurry up and get down to business." Lung scratched his head, "Didn't we talk about business outside already?" "Talk my ass." All right, if you have any questions, feel free to ask." Lung sat cross-legged on the chair without a care for his image. "Someone from your family is locked up there too?" Scylla asked. "Yeah, a senior who was locked up there 50 years ago. This young master volunteered to go rescue him, lest he be plotted against by some people even before he left the sector." "It was also 50 years ago." Scylla frowned. Just how big of a thing had happened 50 years ago, to actually involve so many people? Lung rubbed the soles of his feet, looked at Scylla and said, "That incident 50 years ago was too big and involved too many people. The 4 great hunter regiments, a few great business families, military personnel and politicians were all dragged into it." He paused for a moment, then continued, "Haven't you noticed that your life as a hunter can still be considered peaceful until now? Even the newly risen Poison Fong, that you guys have eliminated, and some other unpresentable but arrogant fellows, none of them were able to cause much of a stir. The reason why all the great forces and even the military did not take any forceful measures was because these fellows were too weak in comparison. They were left to be seasonings, and the experts did not make any moves at all. For example, haven't you noticed that you've only seen 3 of the 4 great forces, and the last one has always been keeping a low profile?" Chapter 162. You can't say that they're the only ones keeping a low profile. Actually, everyone is keeping a low profile. It's just that their people are keeping a relatively low profile. For the past 50 years, there haven't been any major conflicts between the 4 major hunter regiments or between the 4 major hunter regiments and the military, business, or political circles. This is also a buffer period for everyone, Lung continued. Scylla didn't make a sound. Ever since Scylla joined Vanguard, he had often paid attention to the movements of the 4 major hunter regiments. Basically, the general trend of the hunter regiments in the League of Stars was toward the 4 major hunter regiments. The 4 major hunter regiments served as a symbol. However, as he learned more about them, Scylla realized that the 4 major hunter regiments weren't as flashy and flamboyant as recorded in history. It could be said that they were much more low-key than recorded in history. Now that he thought about it, it was indeed due to the events that took place 50 years ago. If he hadn't read the contents of the diary given to him by Enji, Scylla probably wouldn't even know about the events that took place 50 years ago that affected the entire League of Stars. However, what Scylla still didn't know was, what exactly happened 50 years ago that caused the 4 major hunter regiments to retract their edge. In the League of Stars, be it the electronic network or the physical records, there was no mention of the events that took place 50 years ago. Perhaps some of the older members of the League of Stars had heard of it, but they didn't dare to say it out loud. Did you go to Lon Hudy's liaison department when you were on the transit planet? Lung asked. Lon Hudy was the low-key side of the 4 major hunter regiments that Lung mentioned. Lon Hudy was rather special among the 4 major hunter regiments. Their numbers might not even be 1/10 of the number of Vanguard and the other 2 major hunter regiments, but their average strength was much higher. In the ranking of the hunter regiments in the League of Stars, the overall strength of the 4 major hunter regiments was about the same. However, Lon Hudy's average combat strength was publicly recognized as the strongest in the League of Stars. Furthermore, they didn't have a B squadron. This was what made Lon Hudy special. The members of the Lon Hudy hunter group would have butterfly-shaped tattoos on their bodies. There were ghost butterflies, phoenix butterflies, and other different types of tattoos. Among these major types of tattoos, everyone had different tattoos. Upon hearing Lung's question, Sillin shook his head. Back then, after finding the coordinates of Vanguard, he headed straight there and didn't pay attention to the other hunter regiments. Lon Hudy's liaison department has always been empty. Even if you go there, you will only see some low-level members. However, no one knows where the other core members of Lon Hudy's team are. They disappeared more than 40 years ago. At this point, Lung snickered. However, this time, even the most low-profile Lon Hudy will return, and it will be a strong return. Do you know what happened 50 years ago? Sillin asked. Lung made an apologetic gesture and said, I only know a few things related to my family, and I only have a rough idea about the other powers. Even though everyone was involved back then, their goals and needs were different. Didn't the people at Vanguard tell you? Come to think of it, it's a publicly acknowledged secret. If I wasn't the young master of the Andryra family, I wouldn't have the right to know what happened to my family back then. Then forget it. Sillin expressed that he didn't care. Let's talk about this mission. What do you mean by it? What do I mean? Didn't I say it very clearly before? I'm asking you to help me complete the mission. Speaking of which, this mission is beneficial to Vanguard. That electronic notebook only mentioned a mission at Sector S, but it didn't say what exactly it was. Lung scratched his head with the hand he used to rub his feet just now. Well, to put it simply, that core mission of our Andryra family will definitely not land on me, and my old man won't let me charge and break through enemy lines right now either. He said that I'm not capable enough right now, and I didn't leave behind a seed to continue my line. It would be tragic if I never returned. That's why I requested an additional mission from my old man on my own accord. Arson. Arson? Yeah. They're fighting fiercely in the front yard, and we're setting fire to the backyard. It's a way to divert some attention and give ourselves a chance to train. There are no hard and fast requirements for the mission's success or failure, and there's no absolute goal. The degree of freedom is very high, and it's purely for entertainment. The place you chose for pure entertainment sure is special. You'll lose your life if you're not careful, and it'll still be tragic. Lung said excitedly, it's fine. My old man didn't turn down the mission even if the difficulty was lowered. It's a rare opportunity, and I have a feeling that Sector S will be very chaotic when the time comes. We'll take this opportunity to muddy the waters a little more, and we'll just be bystanders. Sillin thinks for a moment. He had nothing better to do anyway, and he wouldn't let go of such an opportunity. Sillin didn't want to turn down the mission the moment he saw the word Sector S, but there were some questions that were better answered first. Why 50 years? It happened 50 years ago, and a large number of people were sentenced to 50 years. That shouldn't be the case. Originally, other than the heavyweights, the small fries were either dead or caught and sentenced to 10 to 50 years. There have been people who returned one after another in the past few years, but the ratio of people released from Sector S to those who returned safely is more than 1,000 to 1. In fact, Some people who were released during that period were completely annihilated, and the rate of safe return is too low. This is also one of the reasons why everyone made preparations to protect the heavyweights' return this time. As for why the mission was only sentenced to 50 years, it was thanks to the fact that the military and the political groups were not united. As for the influential figures in the academic world, they had also reached some underground deals with everyone, so under the joint efforts of everyone reduced their sentences to 50 years. I see. Sillin thinks recalled something. It wasn't that there were no Hunter regiments results in Glory and Code, but that the results that belonged to the Hunter regiments had all been exchanged for someone else's. Those were all deals. So, Lung moved closer with sparkling eyes. Let's go cause some trouble. Sillin looked up and glanced at Lung. You didn't volunteer to apply for such a mission from your old man because you're tired of what's going on at Sector H, did you? You guessed it. Go, I'll tell you some of the secrets from back then in secret. I didn't say I'm not going. Ha, then it's settled. Lung jumped up and ran towards the door. He was about to open the door when he suddenly paused. He turned around and put on his shoes with a bitter expression, tidied up his clothes, and tidied the few tufts of hair on his head that were messed up. He cleared his throat and opened the door with a solemn expression. When they returned to the big conference room, both parties carried out further negotiations, discussed the remuneration and other matters, signed the contract, shook hands, and parted ways. However, because Sillin was going to rest here for a few days, Lung and the Andryra family also stayed at Sector KJ. Vanguard had arranged a temporary place for them to stay. Of course, it was impossible for the Andryra family to stay on Vanguard forever. Instead, they were arranged to stay on a nearby planet. However, Lung couldn't hold it in after a day and flew directly to the transit planet with his men. He told Sillin to look for him at the transit planet after he was done resting and taking care of his business. Shotten didn't say anything about Sillin's choice. He only told Sillin to rest more in the 6th Division for the next few days. After leaving the A Squadron zone, Sillin and Shotten boarded the spaceplane and departed towards the 6th Division zone. Hui Mao lay lazily on Qin Lai's shoulder and wagged its tail every now and then. Hui Mao didn't interrupt Sillin Halong's conversation earlier. It didn't think anything mattered, and it was fun no matter where it was. Of course, it was more than willing to go to a strange and dangerous place. It would be best if it could turn the world upside down. I feel like you're in a good mood. Sillin flicked the fur on Hui Mao's ears. Hui Mao flicked his ears and slapped Sillin's hand away with his paw. He snorted, the weapons in the A Squadron zone are pretty good, and their information maintenance is better than ours. But? Sillin raised an eyebrow and played along with the guy's words. I'll let this guy sublimate himself a little more. As expected. But I have the ability to turn that place into a mess, hee hee meow. Hui Mao raised his chin and said smugly. Alright, you'll have a chance to make a scene at Sector S later. That is, for the mission later. I'm going to eat more for the next few days. Actually, your main point is the last sentence, isn't it? Although it was the first time he came to the 6th Division's stronghold zone, he still felt a lot more relaxed. Maybe the big 6 emblem on it could soothe his emotions a little. With Shotten leading the way, Sillin and Hui Mao were unimpeded. In the past, the 6th Division used to operate on the starships, but now they had all moved back to the base. The buildings were connected like a fortress. Let's go. Everyone's accommodation area is over there. Shotten led Sillin towards one of the buildings. However, before Sillin could enter his room, Carrie stopped him and gave him a bear hug. Then, it was Xiao Shang, Yudi and the others. Tang Qiuqiu came over with a white fur ball in her arms. It was the thing that hatched from Dan. But why did it look a little like a bear other than its slightly bigger ears? However, bears were viviparous, and this fat bear really did jump out of an egg. Sillin searched through the information in his mind and confirmed that he had never seen such a species on that planet. Big brother Sillin, I named it Shueqiu. Tang Qiuqiu said crisply while holding the little fat fellow. Xueqiu. Not bad. Silin said. It's not bad. They all have the word ball in their names. Unlike Huimao. Hubeilu. Didn't they call him Huiz now? It looks like this name was made up of people. No matter how much they disliked the name, they would get used to it after a while. Silin carried Xueqiu, who was in Tang Qiuqiu's arms. Because there were too many people here, this little fellow woke up from his sleep. According to Yudi, this little fellow spent 80% of his time sleeping. The rest of the time, he was looking for food and excretion. After that, he was rolled around like a ball. Little Xueqiu opened his silver eyes and looked around in confusion. He didn't struggle. His little nose twitched, then he narrowed his eyes and yawned. He turned his gaze to Huimao, who was squatting on Silin's shoulder and patting him with his paw. He whimpered as if he was acting coquettishly. Huimao's beard trembled, and he put on a serious look. This guy seems to be older than me. The people who were talking and laughing around them suddenly quieted down. Wheeze, this little fellow hasn't been out for long. It hasn't even been 30 days. I can guarantee that. There are witnesses from the 6th team as well, Carrie said. Huimao stroked his beard and continued, when did you guys start calculating age? When the zygote was forming? Egg? Or when it hatched? For these little fellows that popped out from the inside, of course we start counting them from the moment they hatched. Oh, I see. That's nothing then. Huimao raised his paw again and touched Xueqiu. His mood was much better now. So it's still a baby. If this little fellow were to be calculated according to the time when the egg was born, this little fellow would have become a demon by now. Seeing that everyone's attention was on Xueqiu, the Miantuan who was watching from the wall could no longer stand it. He ran towards Silin with all 4 of his legs and climbed up Silin's pants. He climbed all the way to Silin's shoulder and leaned against Huimao. He even hugged Huimao, which was quite different from his body size. Yo, the Miantuan is here. Silin petted the Miantuan with one hand. You seem to have grown up, little fellow. Upon hearing Silin's words, the Miantuan became even more proud. He opened his mouth wide as if he was laughing. Huimao glanced at the Miantuan beside him and then looked at his body that had not grown up at all. He lifted his leg and kicked. Sometimes, cats were really petty fellows. At the very least, the Miantuan was kicked off Silin's shoulder by Huimao out of indignation. However, with the Miantuan's ability, he would be fine even if Carrie grabbed his tail and threw him against the wall. The few of them gathered together and talked about what happened during this period of time. Tang Qiuqiu had already shown the video taken by the camera to everyone and distributed some souvenirs to everyone, especially the trip to the little garden. Zaya and Cha-Sha, who replaced Asha, also expressed that they would definitely visit the little garden when they had the time. It was really a good place. Honey was used to nourish one's beauty. The price of the honey sold in the little garden had increased by several times over here. This made some of the women in the team decide to form a group and go to the little garden for a vacation. Silin asked about the situation on Dia's side. Diaz and the others who went to Sector E for treatment hadn't returned yet. It was said that they were progressing well and were undergoing rehabilitation. They were all hunters after all, and no one wanted to have a lingering illness. In a battle of life and death, a lingering illness was like an invisible bomb that could explode at any time. However, it was said that they would be able to return in half a year's time. Diaz would often send back videos, and everyone's complexion in the videos was good. This lifted the spirits of the 6th Division by a lot. Where are Yudos and Lycrabe? Silin looked around and did not see the duo. They've gone to handle the admission procedures. Akai and Lieutenant Commander Lu Sua are in charge of that. Carrie said. Silin was a little surprised. After all, it was the captain and the lieutenant commanders who voted for him to join the team back then. Now that he, the lieutenant commander, was not here yet, and Shotten was at the A-team's side. Why was the decision made so quickly? But when he thought about it, he felt relieved. Even Senior Bart had agreed to it, and Sillin was the one who brought them here. No one would have any objections. Although Shotten was handling business at the A-team's side, he should have been approved a long time ago. Therefore, the voting for Yudos and Lycrabe to join the team was much simpler. Carrie grew excited the moment the newbies were mentioned. I heard from a brother in the second squad that you guys performed very well at the first floor hall of the Transit Star Vanguard's liaison department. What do you think of them? Sillin looked at Carrie. He did not believe that Carrie did not show his strength when Yudos and Lycrabe came. It was just like when he and Carrie first met. When this guy wanted to shake hands, he had to test the other party's skills first. Before Carrie could say anything, Xiao Shang laughed and interrupted, that Yudos guy's piloting skills are pretty good. In any case, Carrie lost. Yudi also added, just like when you fought him on the virtual platform. Carrie had also trained his skin to be thicker. He only chuckled and was not that embarrassed about losing 5 out of 10 matches. He had to admit that Yudo's piloting skills and adaptability were very strong. Of the 10 matches, the first 5 were won by Carrie, and the last 5 were all lost. Moreover, each match was lost faster and more decisively than the last. With a talent like Yudo's, they would be able to play a big role in future battles. As for Lycrabe, the medical team said that he spent a lot of time talking to him. Sometimes, when they started talking, he wouldn't even eat, Carrie said. It seemed that the two of them had integrated quite quickly. After resting for 2 days, Sillin prepared to go to the Transit Star. During these 2 days, he competed with everyone in drinking and sparring. At the same time, he also threw a welcome party for Yudos and Lycrabe. The one who ate the most at the party was Huimao, and the second was that fat Shueqiu. As expected of someone who jumped out of an egg. He did not even have a breastfeeding period. Although he drank milk, he ate more of other things. After that day, the 2 biggest gluttons of the 6th Division became famous. When they heard that Sillin had another mission, Carrie and Xiao Shang were pretty disappointed. They were even planning to drag Sillin to a few famous entertainment spots in Sector K. It seemed that Sillin could only go out with them after the mission was over. When he heard that Sillin had another mission at this time, Yudi's eyes flashed. When no one was looking, he passed a note to Sillin. Sillin destroyed it after reading it and made an okay gesture. He did not need to worry about Yudos and Lycrabe. Right now, Yudos could come into contact with and receive fighter training every day. Although it was boring and tiring in the eyes of others, Yudos found it enjoyable. Meanwhile, Lycrabe also began to try to realize a few of his inspirations with the help of the medics who were skilled in pharmacology. After bidding farewell to the people of the 6th Division, Sillin and Huimao stepped onto the starship that was heading towards the transit planet. Although he hadn't officially departed yet, he could clearly sense the unusual atmosphere in the stronghold planet over the past few days. The B squadrons were fine, but the main problem was the A squadron. The tension and restlessness in the atmosphere was spreading uncontrollably to the surroundings. It was a few days later when they stepped onto the transit planet again. Sillin purposely went to the Lon Hudi Hunter Regiment's liaison department to take a look. It was just as Lung had said, it was pretty quiet. However, that was not the case under the surface. Instead of going to Vanguard's liaison department, Sillin went straight to the place Lung mentioned. When he arrived, Lung was still sleeping. He was still wearing the same singlet and beach pants. His slippers were thrown to the side irregularly, and his saliva was dripping all over the bed. When Sillin saw the process of Brzett waking Lung up, he lamented, as expected of someone from a large family. Their actions are beyond imagination. However, what Sillin did not expect was that Brzett, who had been staying by Lung's side like a nanny all this time, did not follow them. It really was just Sillin Helong, Brzett, and a cat. Even if it was a small starship, there was still a lot of space. However, other than 2 humans and a cat, the rest of the starship was filled with machines. Scylla suddenly felt that this trip was going to be very difficult. Chapter 163. The starship that Andryra had arranged for Long could be considered a miniature model. It was much smaller than the average starship, and was shaped like a shuttle. It looked very harmless on the outside, but this starship was installed with the most advanced Sentinel defense system in the League of Stars. Cannons, high-density energy particle beam launchers, and so on were all hidden under this harmless exterior. The quality of the energy blocks used was also of the highest quality. Once they encountered danger, the attack system on this starship would curl up like a hedgehog and raise all the spikes on its body to attack enemies from all directions. The starship's interior was not ostentatious, but upon closer inspection, one would notice that every detail had been carefully designed, installed, and arranged, giving it a low-key sense of extravagance. Inside the starship, there was a weapons storage room not far from the control room and the resting area. All sorts of weapons were stored inside, ranging from cold weapons to thermal weapons. In order to prevent any accidents from happening and not being able to react in time, the control room had been specially modified so that one could rest here directly when they were tired. Because there were only 2 people, Scylla and Helong, and a cat, and no hot beauties, Long had specially set the appearance of the starship service robots to be in the form of various beauties, which was pleasing to the eye. Inside the starship, Long was sprawled on the recliner in the control room, eating the barbecued meat served by the service robots, and sighed out of boredom for the 56th time today. Scylla did not even raise his eyes. He was used to it. This guy had applied for the mission himself, but now he was so bored that his stomach hurt, and sighed all day like a resentful wife. Long looked at Huimao, who was jumping up and down on the table, and said faintly, "See, how nice it is to be a cat. It can happily play with its own tail for half a day, eat when it's hungry, sleep when it's full, and play with its tail again when it's bored." Scylla raised his eyes to look at the 2 fellows. "Actually, you're pretty much the same as it, except that it plays with its tail, while you play with your feet." Long put his feet down from the recliner and swayed. "How boring. Then sleep. If you can't sleep in your natural state, then go into a sleeping pod and wake up if something happens." "How could I possibly do something so boring?" Long said disdainfully. After thinking for a moment, Long's eyes suddenly lit up, and he said to Scylla, "Scylla, do you want to hear some gossip?" "Whose?" "Of course it's from 50 years ago." Long maneuvered the recliner over to Scylla's side. "How about it? Do you want to hear it?" Scylla glanced at Lung's expression, which seemed to be begging him, and then shifted his gaze back to the book in his hands, not saying a word. Lung scratched his head. "Fine, if you don't say anything, I'll take it as a yes." When Huimao heard that they were going to talk about some secrets, he stopped playing with his tail. He jumped from the table to Scylla, climbed onto his shoulder, and pricked up his ears to listen. In the end, Long couldn't even fart for a long time. "Hey, tell me," Huimao urged. "Well, everything is difficult at the beginning. I'm thinking of where to start that would be more attractive," Long Yizheng said. "You've been thinking for almost 10 minutes. Have you made up your mind?" "It's about time." Cough cough. Lung cleared his throat and immediately got into the zone. He asked mysteriously, "Do you know about Olilo's cage?" Huimao tilted his head. He really didn't know about it. Scylla asked uncertainly, "The one from the myth of creation?" Lung nodded. The myth of creation wasn't some profound reading material, but rather a story for children. The stories inside were easy to understand, and they weren't long either. Olilo's cage was one of the many stories in the myth of creation. In this story, the god of creation, in order to test humans, imprisoned 5 things that could help them realize their dreams. This cage was one of the god of creation's hands. Each of the 5 fingers was a lock, and only the corresponding 5 keys could open it. And the thing imprisoned by the god of creation's 5 fingers was called Olilo. In the ancient language, it meant dream. Olilo was a synonym for dreams. Find the key to open the cage and obtain the olilo inside, and your dreams would come true. Although a fairy tale is a fairy tale, no one knows if olilo can really help people realize their dreams. But if there's a chance to find olilo, many people would rush to it. And the incident 50 years ago was caused by a dispute over a key, Lung said. Hearing Lung's words, Silan suddenly remembered that in Komunidin's diary, there was a drawing of a key at the end of the poem on the last page. Silan didn't pay attention to it at the time, but now that he thought about it, it seemed like this was the meaning. Ah! There's really a god of creation. Hui Mao was shocked. Silan and Lung were speechless. Lord Cat, you're looking at the wrong point. Silan scratched Hui Mao's cat head. What god of creation? That's just a fairy tale. It's not real. Also, the main point of this story is Olilo's cage, and not the god of creation. Oh, is that so? Then if the god of creation isn't real, why does Olilo's cage exist? Hui Mao continued to ask. Silan and Hui Mao both looked at Lung. Lung shrugged. That I don't know. It seems like there's a saying about Olilo's cage a long time ago. It should be 1,000 years ago. This saying suddenly appeared 1,000 years ago, and then a few large forces joined together to seal off the news. That's why there are very few people in the League of Stars who know about Olilo's cage now. So that's how it is. Continue. Silan and Hui Mao waited for Lung to continue. Lung proudly crossed his legs and gestured for the beautiful robot beside him to go get some juice. Speaking too much would make him thirsty, and then he said, every key has a special star atlas mark, and in these 1,000 years, the 5 star atlases have already been broken down into a few fragments. Only by finding all the fragments and piecing them together will we be able to find the location of the key. A jigsaw puzzle, huh? Hui Mao mumbled. That sounded troublesome. Actually, the puzzle wasn't troublesome, but finding the fragments was. Actually, as long as you have one of the fragments, if you travel around, you might be able to find the other fragments on the same star atlas. The fragments of the same star atlas can all sense each other. Don't compare the fragments of a star atlas to other glass shards. There are at most 5 fragments of a star atlas, and the smaller ones can have 2 or 3, Lung explained. That should be fine. Isn't it easy as long as there's one fragment? Hui Mao was eager to try. Lung rolled his eyes at Hui Mao. The difficult part is that many people don't have a single fragment. Otherwise, why would there have been such a huge commotion 50 years ago over a single fragment? 50 years ago, some people gathered all the fragments of a star atlas and obtained the complete star atlas, obtaining one of the keys. However, the news was leaked, causing many disputes. What do you mean by some people? Silan asked. Who else? Isn't it those 3 old foxes from the League of Stars' parliament? The 3 of them obtained a fragment each and pieced them together to form a jigsaw puzzle, but the news was leaked. This caused a commotion from all sides. However, Lung rubbed his chin. I suspect that those 3 old fellows leaked it on purpose so that they could watch the tigers fight and reap the benefits. What do you mean? Did you know that after every star atlas is pieced together, the location of the key and the name of the key will appear? However, in the star atlas those 3 old fellows pieced together, the name of the key is White Knight. White Knight. Silan frowned. In the myth of creation, one of the Olilo represented courage, and White Knight could turn darkness into light. White Knight, one of the 5 Olilos. In the myth of creation, it is said that it can bring light to people in the darkness, and in reality, White Knight means energy. In the star atlas, it is best described as an all-purpose energy source. I don't know how much energy this energy source can provide, but since it can make so many people fight to the death, it must not be a small amount. Moreover, those 3 old fellows from the parliament don't have much interest in energy sources. In comparison, I think they prefer to see others fight to the death. Therefore, 50 years ago, there weren't many people involved with the government, but there were a lot of people involved with the army and hunter groups. Sillin now understood why Lung said that everyone wanted different things. Different people had different goals. Among the 5 Olillos, some were suitable for hunters, some were suitable for merchants, and some were suitable for people in the military and academia. They might be the same, or they might be different. As he was speaking, the scanner suddenly gave an alert. There are energy waves ahead. There are energy waves ahead. Lung turned his chair, and immediately became excited. Activate invisibility. Invisibility activated. Deep scan. 5 minutes later, an image appeared on the screen. It should be a battle between 2 forces. There was a huge starship, and there were many aircrafts and fighter jets around it. There were wreckages everywhere, and the firepower was very fierce. Great, there's something to do. Lung rubbed his palms together. After watching for a while, Sillin Helong also noticed some problems. These people should have been caused by internal conflicts, or a battle between spies and traitors. A large hole had been blasted out of the side of the starship, and fighter jets would fly out from it from time to time. There were people from both sides, and it seemed that the battle had already begun inside the starship. The battle inside might not be any weaker than the one outside. What are you planning to do? Sillin looked at Lung. This guy seemed to be on steroids right now, full of vigor. Are we going to charge in as well? Hui Mao moved his claws, very expectant. However, Lung shook his head. The other side is too strong. Compared to that starship, our starship is practically a harmless child that hasn't fully developed. Harmless child. Bullshit. Although there was a huge difference in size, in terms of combat strength, Sillin was absolutely confident that this starship would be able to deal with that big guy. Can't you see that they're having a good time fighting? What we need to do now is obviously to watch the show. Lung snapped his fingers, and the beautiful robot brought over tea and freshly baked biscuits. However, watching the show wasn't something that didn't use his brain. After watching for a while, Sillin already knew which side was the rebel side on the battlefield. Lung chewed on the biscuit, not even bothering to wipe off the crumbs as he said, "Sillin, I have an idea." After hearing Lung's idea, Sillin didn't object. As long as you're not afraid that those fellows will destroy the things here, it's fine. Ha, then it's settled. Lung turned around on his recliner, and ordered with his voice, external appearance change, spherical form. External appearance change activated. Following the AI system's voice, the entire starship's external appearance began to change, changing from its original shuttle-shaped to a plump spherical form. Even the color of the exterior had turned into an arrogant white. In this darkness, a white ball flashing with white light should be very conspicuous. Because there were also people flying over from the other side, the distance between the two sides quickly shortened. Deactivate invisibility. Lung ordered. Deactivate invisibility. The AI system's voice had just sounded when the transformed white spherical starship appeared in front of the people on the other side. The technology of the Andryra family was publicly acknowledged in the League of Stars. To be able to avoid being discovered by the other side's anti-reconnaissance system at such a close distance, it could only be said that this starship's invisibility system was too good. Meanwhile, the people on the other side were obviously shocked by the sudden appearance of this white spherical object. At that moment, both sides were a little distracted, but as the words displayed on the surface of this spherical flying object appeared, the people on the other side began to react to this fellow that had suddenly appeared. The words that appeared on the spherical starship were, "Come on up, we'll take you away." The side that was originally being chased and was almost making a final struggle immediately adjusted their direction after seeing this, flying toward the spherical flying object. "May I ask which side you're from?" "We're from the Sky Prison Hunter Group, and we're currently cleaning up internal traitors." "Everyone, please don't interfere." Sil and Helong stared at the words that came from the starship on the screen and pretended to be deaf and mute. The Sky Prison Hunter Group. He had heard of this name before. It was a hunter group that often operated around Sector S, and they were closely related to the people of Sector S. Seeing that the other side didn't reply to their message even after a long time, the people on the Sky Prison Hunter Group starship grew angry and ordered all forces to attack. However, when the attacks hit the spherical starship, they were all blocked by the energy shield of the spherical starship. It wasn't damaged in the slightest. At this time, the 4 fighters and 1 spaceplane that fled to the front had already arrived near the spherical starship. 5 corresponding passageways had opened up on the spherical starship, and the energy shields where these 5 passageways opened up were partially extinguished. A person in the starship's control room punched the table with a loud bang. Which force are they from? Are they here to receive them? Someone said. Sector S had grown more and more chaotic as of late. A couple of local hunter regiments had been heavily damaged by unknown outsiders, and the reason traitors had appeared in their regiments was also due to the interference of these outsiders. In the past, the local hunter regiments had always been the tyrants of the local hunter regiments, but now they were all being pushed to the brink of mental exhaustion. What on earth happened? What do we do now, Captain? Pursue them with everything you have. Yes, sir. However, when the 5 fighters and 1 spaceplane had entered the spherical starship immediately accelerated and entered stealth mode. It didn't take long for them to shake off the pursuers. The people on the 5 fighters and spaceplane that had entered the spherical starship walked out of their cabins. At first, they thought that they would be met by reinforcements, but they soon discovered that they weren't. All they saw were robots, and none of the robots were holding guns. They also gave off a very friendly feeling. The leader of the group was a bearded man with a slightly crooked back and a bloated body. However, the way he walked gave off a very lithe feeling. The bearded man looked around and motioned for his subordinates not to panic or act rashly. He did not take out his weapon even when a robot approached him. These robots looked very friendly, and many of them were in the form of beautiful women. They looked no different from the average human, but it was a very simple matter for hunters like them who often roamed around Sector S to distinguish between robots and average humans. There would always be some people with wicked interests in Sector S, and their high-end robots that were set in the form of beautiful women. The leading female robot walked in front of the bearded man and gave him a sweet smile. She said politely, "Greetings, guests. Welcome to this place. My master would like to invite you over." "Oh, I wonder what the master of this place looks like." The bearded man didn't seem worried at all. "The master will treat everyone well. The master said that all visitors are guests, and we must treat them well." "All right. We would like to thank the master of this place for saving us, haha." The bearded man and his dozen or so subordinates followed the female robot out of the passageway. Inside the control room, Lung looked at the image on the screen and sneered, still putting on an act. "You look calm, but you're actually nervous as hell." Lung pointed at the bearded man's abdomen on the screen and continued, "That guy doesn't have just one pair of hands. In fact, he has several pairs of hands, and they're all tucked inside. Every hand is probably holding a weapon, and they'll fire at the slightest anomaly." "How did you know?" "I guessed." The bearded man was truly shocked when he saw the 2 humans and a cat in front of him. At the same time, a plan formed in his mind. A big smile appeared on his face. "Thank you for saving me and my subordinates. My name is Bell, and we used to be part of the Sky Prison Hunter Regiment. We left the Sky Prison Hunter Regiment due to some conflicts, and we got into a fight because we thought that they wouldn't let us leave. Thank you for lending us a hand, or we might not have left this place alive. It's a pleasure to meet you, Mr. Bell. We just happened to pass by and lend a hand, that's all. There's no need to be so courteous. Come, have a taste of our Beauty Lisa's freshly baked cookies." Lung said like a hedonistic rich kid. Bell and the others could tell that the wine on the table was of the highest quality. even the glasses were made from the best materials. The young master of a wealthy family didn't look like he'd ever been through any hardships. He was nothing more than a loafer who loved to enjoy life. Who are you, little brother? Belle asked. Lung winked at them while holding his wine glass. Let me tell you a secret. My little friend and I snuck out of Sector S. We heard that something big was happening here, so we couldn't hold back our curiosity and came over to join in the fun. Hee, as expected, we found you fighting the moment we arrived at Sector S. You call that a fight? That was clearly a fight to the death. Belle and the others cursed silently. After listening to Lung's explanation and considering the layout of their surroundings, Belle and the others were starting to believe that these two people had snuck out of Sector S. There were no servants, no guards, only robots. And there were only 2 of them in Sector S. Should they say that these 2 were ignorant and didn't understand the cruelty of the world, or that they were idiots with brain damage? Either way, it was beneficial for Belle and the others. Although Belle secretly despised the idiotic young master of a rich family, he still patiently chatted with Lung and tested the waters. Sillin sat there and stared at the book without saying a word. It had been a long time since Elder Lung had tricked someone, so he gave him all he wanted. Hui Mao lay on top of Sillin's shoulder and licked his lips from time to time. Chapter 164. Lung was very happy right now. Sillin and Hui Mao knew this even with their eyes closed. In short, young Master Lung and Belle hadn't stopped laughing ever since they started fooling each other. The robots had delivered a lot of drinks, but none of the alcohol young Master Lung had kept in his collection. Most likely, they thought that it would be a waste to give good stuff to these people. As Sillin flipped through some information about Sector S, he noticed that Hui Mao was licking his lips more and more frequently than before. In order to prevent the guy's gaze from being too obvious, Sillin told Hui Mao to close his eyes and pretend to sleep. He looked as harmless as a pet cat. The more Belle talked with Lung, the more certain he was that he had run into an idiot rich young master who had come out on an adventure. His subordinates were pretty much the same as well. They looked at Sillin Helong and didn't feel like they were dangerous at all. One was an idiot rich young master with a simple mind, the other was an honest and unsociable hothead, and the other was a gray cat. They really weren't much of a threat. Right now, young Master Lung was enthusiastically explaining the advantages of the starship, its attack and defense. He looked very pleased with himself. Bearded Belle listened to Lon with a smile on his face, and made a seemingly careless gesture with one hand behind his back. Several of the others at the table, who were drinking their wares, exchanged glances with one another. Belle's smile grew more and more sinister, but Lung didn't seem to notice it at all. He continued talking to himself, completely unaffected. It was only when Belle pulled out a gun and pointed it at Lung's head that Lung stopped and blinked at Belle. It was as if he was asking him what he meant. The moment Big Beard Belle pulled out his gun, the rest of the group did the same and pointed their guns at Sillin and the robots around them. They thought that the robots would react, but they just smiled sweetly and didn't carry any weapons in their hands. The robot holding the plate didn't put it down either. TSK, what should I say to you, young master? Belle kept his gun pointed at Lung the entire time. He sneered, it's such a waste to give such a good starship to 2 ignorant brats. Ugh. Sir, what are you doing? We saved your lives after all, Lung said innocently. Hui Mao, who was squatting on Sillin's shoulder, rolled his eyes. Keep pretending, keep pretending. That's right. Thank you for saving our lives. For the sake of gratitude, you can forget about your lives. This starship only listens to my orders. Lung declared his value. However, Big Beard Belle didn't plan to let them live. Just as he was about to fire, a barrier suddenly rose from the ground and trapped him inside. The others were also trapped inside the barrier. Sillin didn't move at all. This was a game Lung had come up with to kill time out of boredom, so Sillin just let him play by himself. However, after the barrier was raised, Hui Mao jumped down from Silen's shoulder and started running towards the tunnel. There was still a prey hiding there. Since there were so many people trapped here, it was enough for Lung to play with. There was no need to fight over the last one. Watching Hui Mao run out, Lung waved his hand, and the robots started moving on their own. They didn't seem to be a threat at all. Lung stood up from his chair and stretched lazily. He put on his slippers and looked at the people trapped inside the barrier. Someone had fired at the barrier, but the energy rebounded and hit them instead. 3 of them were killed by the rebounding energy. Bell had obviously seen something like this before, so he didn't fire his gun recklessly. When he saw that his 3 subordinates were dead, he gave up on the idea of firing and tried to think of other ways to deal with Lung while he tried to talk to him. When Bell and the others got off the spaceplane and passed through the tunnel, the scanners had told them to put down their powerful weapons like grenades. They could only carry guns and other small tools. It seemed that the young master had come prepared. Lung wasn't as easy to talk to as they thought. He walked up to one of Bell's subordinates and smiled innocently. He took out a control and pressed a button. The barrier began to fill with water up to the man's neck. Along with the water, a few small, blood-sucking worms entered the barrier. The worms seemed excited when they smelled the fresh blood and quickly latched onto the man's body. No matter what they did, they couldn't get rid of the worms unless they peeled off a layer of skin. As the worms latched onto him, the man's resistance gradually weakened. His face was pale and drained of blood, and his skin was showing signs of drying up. The worms were now several times thicker than before, and they were now glowing red. The other people trapped inside the barrier panicked, but no matter what they said, no matter how loudly they begged or how much they offered, Lung didn't change his mind. After the first man was sucked dry, the second, the third, the 5th man started to tremble the moment he saw Lung standing in front of him. When the barrier started to fill with water, the man shot himself right away. Since he was going to die anyway, he might as well die a quick death. He didn't have to experience the fear of his life being slowly sucked dry. However, the worms didn't let the man go even after he committed suicide. They continued to suck his body dry. When Lung stood in front of the 6th man, he didn't press the button right away. Instead, he said, "I'll give you a chance. If you can make me happy, I'll let you go." This young master will never go back on his word. What do you want me to say?" the man asked shakily. "For example, some small news about Sector S. It's my first time coming to Sector S after all, and I heard that it's pretty lively this time." The man told him a lot of things he had heard, but not a single piece of truly valuable information. "Sigh, I'm really sorry." Lung pressed the button. After testing a dozen or so people, he realized that the information he obtained was far too little. All he knew was that they had turned against the people in the sky prison because of a box. Someone had paid a high price for the box, and had even paid half of the price in advance. This was also the reason why Bell was able to lead so many people in rebellion. However, Bell was the only one who knew who the buyer was. Everyone else was just following Bell's orders. As for the box, Bell was the one who had been holding it all this time. "Where's the box?" Lung asked while standing in front of Bell's barrier. "It's on the spaceplane." Bell answered in a low voice. When he saw the look of disbelief on Lung's face, Bell tore open his jacket to reveal a ring of tentacles wrapped around his torso. When the tentacles unfurled, Bell's bloated body suddenly shrunk, revealing his original body. There was nothing there at all. That being said, it seemed like the box wasn't on him. Silen stared at Bell. Another non-human that he had never seen before. He might not be a specific race, though. After all, there were all kinds of strange people in the galaxy. But what made Silen feel strange was that he had a feeling that there was something on Bell's body. Lung glanced at Bell's tentacles and sneered, "How dare you show off your low-level tentacles? You'd better tell me the truth, or you'll die a horrible death. Believe it or not, it's up to you." Belle's eyes darkened. Lung toyed with the controller as he walked outside. He was probably heading to where Belle's spaceplane was. As Lung walked out, Belle glanced at Sillin, who was still sitting in his chair and not paying any attention to them. He hesitated for a moment, but quickly made up his mind. His eyes were filled with viciousness. 2 tentacles protruded from his trousers, each holding a tube-shaped object. When they came into contact with the barrier, the tips of the 2 tubes suddenly emitted a red light. It was the light of high-intensity cutting energy. Bang! The barrier was broken, and Belle quickly pounced towards Lung. But before he could fire a shot, he was shot in the head. The beautiful robot was still smiling, but one of the gun barrels on her arm slowly retracted and returned to its original state. Lung didn't stop walking. He didn't even turn around to look at Belle. Sillin frowned as he looked at Belle, who was lying on the ground. Belle had arranged for one of his subordinates to stay on the spaceplane, but that guy was quite unlucky. Hui Mao was toying with him like a mouse. When Lung arrived, all he saw was a hole in the spaceplane. The spaceplane's door was obviously heavily encrypted, and Lung didn't bother trying to decrypt it. He just had the robot forcefully cut the door open. An ear-piercing alarm sounded from the spaceplane. By the time Lung saw Hui Mao and the other man, the man was already going crazy. He was curled up in a corner and kept spouting nonsense. Seeing that Hui Mao had lost interest, Lung had the robot drag the man out and dispose of him. Then, he started searching the spaceplane. "What are you looking for?" Hui Mao crouched on the back of a chair and licked his paws. "Something good. Something good." Hui Mao scanned the area again. Apart from energy blocks, there really wasn't anything worth his attention. But these were just regular energy blocks, and they couldn't be compared to the special energy blocks the 6th Division could find. So, Hui Mao just yawned and said lazily, "Then take your time." Lung paused when he heard Hui Mao's words. He looked at Hui Mao, who was walking away with his tail wagging, and stopped looking. He followed Hui Mao out of the spaceplane. "Why aren't you looking?" Hui Mao asked. "It shouldn't be that valuable." By the time Lung and Hui Mao returned to the control room, the people who had their blood drained were launched into space along with the barrier. Then, there was a dazzling explosion. However, the dead Belle was left behind. "What's wrong?" Lung asked. He had ordered the robots to get rid of everyone here, but why did he leave Belle alive? "I told her not to touch Belle for now." Sillin put down the things in his hands and walked over. "What did you find?" "I don't know. I just think we'll find something." The moment Sillin said this, Hui Mao exclaimed in surprise and moved closer to Belle. He sniffed carefully and said, "Something's here." While saying this, Hui Mao plunged a claw into Belle's abdomen and pulled out a small black ball the size of a pigeon's egg. "What on earth is this?" Sillin asked. "I don't know." Lung looked left and right at the object. Then, he took out a scanner and scanned it. It showed that it was a type of stone unique to Sector S. Belle wouldn't have made it so discreet if it was just a rock like this. "Is there something inside this thing?" Lung picked up a table knife from the table and cut it. There wasn't a mark on the black ball at all. "It's hard." Lung looked at the chip on the table knife and threw it away. He was about to switch to a high-energy cutting knife when Hui Mao snatched it back. He bent his feet and held the ball in place with his claws. Then, he opened his mouth and bit down. Crack! The little ball shattered at the sound. A small piece of dark blue light fell to the ground. Hui Mao twitched his nose. The smell was even stronger now. That being said, it would be much easier to find it in the future even if they sealed it with rocks or something else. Earlier, Hui Mao didn't pay attention to the smell at all. That was why he didn't notice it. "An Olillo fragment!" Lung exclaimed. "An Olillo fragment?" Lung picked up the small piece and gave it a look. Then, he passed it to Sillin and said, "Here, this is good stuff." I'm sure it'll be of great use to you when the time comes. Sillin looked at the small blue piece in his hand. So this is the legendary Olillo fragment. As he said that, Sillin looked at Lung. You don't want it? Lung didn't care at all. This Olillo fragment is useless to me. If you ever find a fragment that I need, please don't be stingy. I had a hard time looking for it. Then what do you need? One of the 5 Olillo fragments, the Tear of Gods. Lung's eyes flashed. Sillin didn't know what the Tear of Gods Lung was talking about, but if that was the case, the piece in his hand clearly wasn't a fragment of the Tear of Gods. Otherwise, Lung wouldn't be so careless. It also wouldn't be a fragment of the White Knight. The White Knight had already been collected. The piece in his hand was one of the other 3. Keep it. No matter what it is, it'll be useful to you hunters when the time comes. The Andryra family is only interested in the Tear of the Sea. The other elders have said that we shouldn't spend too much time on other things. If we can't find the Tear of the Sea, then we shouldn't think about anything else. Besides, if it weren't for your beard, he would have been blown to smithereens a long time ago. Alright, I'll keep this for now. If I find an Olillo fragment next time, I'll show it to you and see if it's what you want. Hey, good brother. Lung patted Sillin on the shoulder and had the robot take care of Belle on the ground. Sillin didn't expect to obtain an Olillo fragment so quickly. He flipped his hand and put the fragment into his ring. But Sillin, this fragment in your hand isn't easy to collect. From the looks of it, there should be at least 3 fragments, maybe even 5. It's going to be troublesome. Lung smiled and extended his fist. I won't let this news out, but if I do find the other fragments, you'll have to give me something in exchange. Okay. Sillin raised his fist and punched Lung. Although Lung's personality was strange and capricious in the eyes of outsiders, he was a good friend to people he acknowledged and wanted to get to know, such as Sillin, Knight, C.I. Jincheng, and so on. In the words of his old man, the Andryra family has their own brainless way of doing things. Lung did an investigation based on the genetic information he collected. Belle, a level 2 prison inmate of Sector S. His subordinates were all level 1 prisoners. This is Sector S alright. Even prisoners have become hunters. Lung joked. The prison atmosphere of Sector S was divided into 5 levels. Level 1 was the lowest level, and almost all level 5 prisoners were influential figures. This was why all forces had come to Sector S this time. Hunter regiments were not allowed to openly enter most of the places in Sector S, but it was in this small remaining area that a large group of tough and cruel hunter regiments had appeared. Many of these hunter regiments were related to the guards and prison guards of Sector S, and many of their members had once stayed in Sector S's prisons. In fact, there were even some low-level prisoners who hadn't completed their sentences yet among them. In reality, foreign hunter regiments were not allowed in Sector S. If you were to report them, they would say that they were just doing a labor reform mission. It was a form of indulgence in disguise. In order to make full use of the resources available, Sillin had modified Belle's spaceplane and fighter a little. This way, they didn't look the same as they used to, and it also made it easier for Sillin Helong to move about later on. After all, he couldn't just fly this starship everywhere in broad daylight, and it was better to use these local spaceplanes and fighters for certain things that required landing on planets. The spaceplane and fighter the Andryra family had equipped on this starship looked a little different compared to Belle's. It was better to keep a lower profile. Of course, some of the hidden equipment were Andryra's stuff. They were high-end goods after all, so it would be a waste not to use them. After the modifications were done, Sillin returned to the control room and lay down. It didn't take long before the system notified him that there was a planet with detailed coordinates in front of him. It's Hell, Lung said excitedly. The planet, Hell, was shrouded in some gray, blurry things. Hell was an abandoned planet. In the past, this planet wasn't called Hell, but due to various reasons, a catastrophe had occurred. At the same time, the planet's crust had become active, making it uninhabitable for long periods of time. Legend has it that hell is red, the color of blood. Lung said in a strange voice. Poison Fang's planet is also red. Hui Mao said stubbornly. It was as if a red planet was nothing to him. But Hui's, this planet wasn't red in the past. It was dyed red by blood. Lung said in a tone that sounded like he was telling a ghost story. Hui Mao glanced sideways at him. You actually believe such a retarded lie? It can't be helped. I heard that this planet experienced the apocalypse catastrophe, and ever since then, this planet has lost its former vitality and slowly turned into this ghastly state. You should know that this planet used to be a rank A planet. What about now? It's showing signs of going from rank B to rank C, and maybe even rank D. Why did it become like this? Hui Mao asked. Just how much power would it take to turn a planet from rank A to rank BCD? The reason this planet became like this is all thanks to its inhabitants. There used to be a huge research institute on this planet, a research institute that specialized in using prisoners for human research. Later on, things slowly spiraled out of control, and the planet seemed to have become angry. Earthquakes happened all year round, so maybe you'll see a mountain peak one day, and a plain the next, Lung said. So cruel. Yeah. Lung smiled mysteriously. Let me tell you a secret. From what I know, there are Hellguard hounds inside hell. I just don't know if they're still around. Are you interested in taking a look? Of course. Chapter 165. When they got close to planet Hell, they could clearly see the planet on the big screen. Everything around the planet was gray and hazy, and Lung had sent out many detectors to test the various parameters of the planet. Although the air pollution was over the limit, for Lung, Silen, and Hui Mao, even if they didn't wear a protective suit, they would still be able to withstand it. From the images sent back by the detectors, the planet had indeed changed greatly. It wasn't completely blood red like what Lung had said, but was just mottled blood red mixed in with the earthy yellow background. The images from a few decades ago didn't look like this. There was more blood red back then, and the current situation should be caused by the movement of the Earth's crust, Lung said. Huh, what's that? Hui Mao couldn't help but jump from Silen's shoulder to the control panel, getting closer to the screen. In the image sent back by one of the detectors, an unknown beast more than 10 meters tall with thick black fur all over its body suddenly leaped out from the side of the mountain rock. Its feet looked like hooves, and when it roared, it revealed a mouth full of sharp teeth. There were traces of blood on its body, but it wasn't fresh red blood, but rather blue. This beast was running with all its might, as if something was chasing after it. Suddenly, a shadow flashed past, and a huge impact pounced on the beast. A dog? Hui Mao tilted his head to take a look, and said uncertainly. The thing that had pounced on the beast looked like a dog, but it wasn't exactly one. Upon closer inspection, there were many differences between it and a dog, such as its claws, and its face. There was something out of place about it. After the dog pounced on the beast, it bit down on the beast's neck, and no matter how much the beast struggled, it wouldn't let go. In the end, when it was flung out together with a large piece of meat in its mouth. As more and more blood flowed out of the beast no longer had the vigor and speed it had at the beginning. It didn't run far before it was bitten by the dog that had pounced on it again, and the number of wounds increased. The dog was practically tearing the beast apart, tearing chunks of flesh from the body that was 3 times its size, bit by bit. Bluish blood splattered everywhere, and gradually, some small carnivorous animals that had been hiding also emerged, but since the dog was there, they didn't rush forward. The ferocious beast had already stopped struggling. It was completely dead. After confirming that the ferocious beast was dead, the dog gasped for breath. Blue blood dripped from the corner of its mouth. Its body was covered in sticky blue blood. Without looking at the big fellow that had been torn beyond recognition, it lifted its feet and left, leaving only blue footprints behind. After the dog left, the small carnivorous animals that were peeking their heads out to enjoy this effortlessly delicious meal. "That's the hellhound," Lung said. Sillin brought up the image of the dog-like creature. "Is that them?" "They are not pure dogs. They were created by humans." Lung laid back on the chair and said slowly, "They have the genes of both dogs and humans in their bodies, or humans with dog genes implanted into them, or dogs with human genes implanted into them. Some used wolves, but in the end, those people found that dogs were more effective than wolves, because wolves are too wild and hard to control, while dogs have a higher degree of control. In the past, before this planet experienced a catastrophe, these fellows were used to guard other experimental creatures, such as prisoners that were prepared to be used as experimental subjects or other animals. They could remember the aura of each experimental subject, not just the aura on the surface, but the aura that originated from their genes. Then, no matter where these experimental subjects escaped to, they would be able to track them down, chasing them for the rest of their lives until they died. Later on, the catastrophe of the planet came. There was a large-scale earthquake, and the Earth's crust moved violently. The original protective net was almost completely paralyzed. Volcanoes erupted, and the world was covered in gray. The virus in the experimental base leaked out, and the experimental subjects escaped. The rampaging virus and experimental subjects completely changed the world, and later on, the ruler of the planet found that this planet was no longer habitable. The virus and experimental subjects could be dealt with as long as there was time, but what they couldn't deal with was the increasingly frequent movement of the Earth's crust. So in the end, they gave up on this planet. What was left behind were all kinds of viruses, all kinds of monsters that escaped from the laboratory, and dogs whose lifelong goal was to hunt down these escaped monsters. Later on, this planet gained the name Hell, and these dogs were called Hellsguard dogs. They were also the last guardians of this planet. So, some of them were originally human, but they were modified into this neither human nor dog form? Sillin said. Yes. Lung switched the image and filtered through the images sent by the scanners. He picked out one that wasn't too clear. There was too much dust that had been kicked up, so the image was slightly obscured, but the key parts were still clearly visible. That's the original form of a human. Sillin and Hui Mao looked over. Unlike the dog from before, this body now looked more like a human. Its face was also similar to that of a human, but its entire body was covered in long fur. There was also a tail behind it, and its ears were a little pointy. When it ran, it was also like a wild beast, using both its hands and feet instead of just walking on its feet like a human. They could also hear some roars. Aside from its somewhat human-like appearance, its habits and lifestyle were no different from that of a wild beast. This was something that had been developed when they were first modified by the experimental base. In other words, the people in the experimental base had never treated them as humans. Some of the fur on the tip of Hui Mao's tail stood up, and he suddenly thought about what would happen if he was caught by those mad scientists. Meow, that's so scary. Do you want to go in? Lung collected the various parameters of the planet's environment and placed them on the interface for Sillin and Hui Mao to see more clearly. Since we're already here, of course we have to go. Sillin was not afraid of those things, and what interested him was whether there was any valuable information left behind in the original experimental base after the catastrophe. Moreover, the virus resources on this planet were very rich. Since those wild beasts could withstand the virus and not die, then with his physique, it should not be a problem. Moreover, in places where the Earth's crust was moving frequently, it was easier to find some things buried deep underground. Because the outer layer of the planet was covered in gray, Sillin Helong did not use teleportation. Instead, he directly piloted the spaceship that Sillin had modified. The starship was set in stealth mode to prevent others from attacking the starship while they were on the planet. Passing through the gray area, Scylla saw the situation on the surface of the planet, and it was similar to the image sent back by the probe. They found a high-altitude area, and after scanning and finding no large wild beasts, they parked the spaceship there. The moment Scylla walked out of the spaceship, he felt the restlessness of the planet. He took out a small tube that was as thick as a finger, pressed a button on the side, and the tube began to suck. There were several layers of filtration membrane inside it, and it would absorb the bacteria according to their different physical and chemical characteristics. After collecting the microbes in the air and putting away the tube, Scylla looked not far away. Hui Mao had long since run out to play with some small animals hiding in the underground cave. Lung took out a metal ball, and after activating it, a few tentacle-like things appeared on the metal ball, and then it floated in the air. The tentacles moved and pointed in a direction. Lung waved his hand. "Hey, Scylla, there's a water source here." Where there was a water source, there would be a lot more species, and they might be able to see some strange creatures. "Let's go, stupid cat." "Okay, right away." Hui Mao reached his paw into the cave, and then chased after Scylla headlong. After walking for a short while, they found a stream, which was probably formed by the melting of snow from high up in the mountains. There were some animal bones beside the stream, and it looked like they had been here for a while. They were probably killed when they came here to drink water. Scylla looked at the deep teeth marks on the neck bone and the bones around it. This should be the work of a hellhound. Yeah, they usually only hunt fugitives, they won't eat fugitives, so they threw them here to benefit other animals. Lung reached out to play with the water in the stream and said, "Let's take a look around." Lung nodded in agreement. This mountain should have been formed because of the movement of the Earth's crust 100 years ago. They said that we would definitely find some ancient fossils there. That's money. As it turned out, this trip was worth it. Lung's detector found the fossil of an ancient creature. Young Master Lung obviously wouldn't dig it himself, so he ordered a robot to bring tools over from a remote control device in his hand. After processing it, he threw it directly onto the aircraft. Scylla took the opportunity to take some samples. Ancient creature samples were too expensive, and many people weren't willing to exchange money to buy samples. Now that he had this opportunity, Scylla naturally wouldn't let it go. Just as Scylla Helong was busy with the ancient fossils, the detector that he had released earlier sent a message. "Seems like we found the original location of the base." Lung looked at the message and said, "According to the information sent by the detector, the place wasn't too far from here, so Scylla Helong directly used his hoverboard and flew over. The base had long been buried, and there was no entrance to be found on the surface. Scylla Helong chose a position according to the scanned underground map and dug a hole. This position was one of the entrances to the research base, and after going down the hole, he would be able to find the passage very quickly. Since this place had been buried for too long, the air inside was filled with volatile gases of a lot of lethal poisons. That was why Scylla Helong wore a mask. As for Hui Mao, the guy wasn't afraid at all. I heard that people had sent people to search this research base many times in the past to see if there were any good things left behind. However, they never found anything, or if they did, they were buried too deep. At the time, this place should have been buried deep due to crustal movements, and it only rose again after many movements. Otherwise, we really wouldn't have been able to enter. Our luck is pretty good. After this time, there's no telling when this base will be buried deep again." Lung said happily. There was an energy lamp floating in front of them, illuminating the corpses on the ground quite clearly. Judging from the bones, many of them didn't look like humans, but that didn't mean they weren't humans in the past. There were a lot of prisoners in Sector S, and it was common for them to fish out some people who fit the criteria for experimental subjects and conduct experiments when necessary. After walking through the passageway, they began to see some rooms. Some were open, and some were tightly shut. However, judging from the ones that were open, these rooms were used to store basic tools and materials. After walking for a while more, they began to see some separated laboratories and some places where they stored their experimental specimens. Of the liquid tanks that stored the specimens, only 2 were intact. The rest were broken. Inside the intact liquid tank were 2 monsters that had been modified beyond recognition. One of them was probably an adult experimental subject, and the other was an unborn fetus. It was a severely deformed fetus. The selected prisoners will be provided with specialized food. Some of the successful experiments will be used to reproduce their offspring, and if their offspring turn out to be outstanding, they will continue to be used as working parents. The value of their research will be even greater, especially when it comes to embryos, Lung explained. Silin Helong knew very well about the madness of a mad scientist. They were the kind of people that could not be restrained by morality or law. For the sake of research, even they themselves were treated as experimental subjects, and they were cruel to others and even more cruel to themselves, much less to unborn fetuses, infants, and children. The specimens in the other storage room were all hellhounds. The experimental subjects sealed inside the liquid tanks looked a little like a human, and a little like a dog. In fact, it was possible to find elements of both on every experimental subject. Nose, eyes, mouth, ears, claws, a few of them were infants that had just been born. Those should be failed products, and the most typical failed products would be sealed as experimental records. I once heard that there weren't originally this many hellhounds. Among the successful experimental hellhounds, the outstanding ones would be chosen to reproduce, and then the 3rd and 4th generation. The hellhounds before the calamity were all born from outstanding parents. At the time, the outstanding hellhounds would be sold to other prisons to guard the prisoners. However, the hellhounds were much less useful in prison zones, and some of them were treated as entertainment tools by the wardens. They watched them fight each other, and in the end, these hellhounds would either die or be crippled. Therefore, the real hellhounds are only found on this planet, Hell. Lung said while looking at the half-human, half-dog babies sealed inside the liquid tanks that did not even open their eyes. Won't they resist? Hui Mao asked. Resist? Lung laughed. Everyone who resisted died. Not long after they were born, the scientists would be able to tell which of them might resist and kill them. Hui Mao shuddered. Sure enough, it was better to stay away from scientists. After looking through a few more rooms, they arrived at the place where the experimental subjects were locked up. The tightly sealed cages were filled with all kinds of corpses. The life support system was still normal, and the experimental subjects locked up inside should have died from fighting each other. Some were torn to pieces, and when there was no food, the companions next to them could also be used as food. The other cage held some of the more troublesome experimental subjects. They could only be locked up in isolation, and they had to be chained up with special chains. There were hellhounds and other experimental subjects among these chained experimental subjects. Regardless of whether their skeletons looked like humans or beasts, judging from the place where they were locked up and the chains they were chained up, these fellows were all very powerful. Silin noticed a fellow that looked like a mummy. Its body was chained up with special chains, and it was not breathing. It really looked like it was dead. Hui Mao wagged his tail, indicating to Silin that this fellow was alive. Silin Helong exchanged glances, and then carefully approached it. He opened the door of the cage outside, but the mummy didn't move at all. The chains that were chained up were all nested in a corner, and half of them were blocked by the body, so it was impossible to tell how long they were. Looking at the scratches on the ground, there were many scratches in a certain area, but beyond that area, there were no scratches. Based on the situation of the previous experimental subjects, the chain wasn't too long, probably around this area. When Silin approached, he suddenly felt that something was wrong, and Lung didn't continue approaching either. The place where they stopped was about 2 meters away from that area. Silin glanced at the mummy-like fellow again, and suddenly his eyelids twitched. He pulled Lung and retreated abruptly. At the same time, When Scylla pulled Lung back, the mummy-like fellow in the corner opened its eyes and pounced at them. The claws on its raised forelimbs extended with a whoosh, and the extended claws were almost 2 meters long, while the mummy-like fellow's range of movement was more than 1 meter beyond the scratches on the ground. This was a meticulously arranged trap. The scratches on the ground were all purposely created. It was to make you think that you were outside of its range of movement, when in fact, you had already entered its hunting zone. The mummy-like body erupted with great power, and Scylla had no doubt that this fellow's claws could easily cut them into pieces. Although it was wearing a mask, they could still smell the rancid and fishy smell coming from it. It moved very quickly, and when Scylla chose to retreat, it had already moved. As Scylla retreated, he raised his hand and fired 3 shots, 2 in the eyes and 1 in the head. Bang! The mummy-like head exploded, and grey blood splattered everywhere. Looking at the dead headless fellow and the broken chain, Lung let out a long sigh. If you see a fellow like this in the future, just shoot. Shoot first, then talk later. I won't go near it even if you kill me. Huimao walked closer to look at the fellow whose head was blown off, and sniffed. What a strange smell, I wonder what species it is. It probably has the genes of a few types of beasts, but it can't be those beasts with strong endurance, or else this fellow wouldn't have lived until now. Lung said. Scylla looked at the place where the chain was broken. There was already a gap there from the bite, or else this fellow wouldn't have been able to break it so easily. However, this fellow was the one who blocked the gap. It knew how to set up a trap, and knew how to block the gap in the chain. Everything was planned. Are those experimental subjects all this intelligent? Scylla asked. I'm not sure, but since it's a successful experiment, it can't be simple. Beep beep beep, as they spoke, the alarm on Lung's hand rang, and Scylla and Huimao also noticed that something was wrong. You're tuning in to the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.